I made perfect maps for each monkey, and we're going to see how far each tier 5 can get on their own. We'll start with dart monkeys. The Ultra Juggernaut is a fun one because we get to put it in a circle surrounded by hedges. This lets it always be attacking, and its balls will bounce off the walls, re-hitting the balloons. This lets it do way more damage than normal and easily beat rounds 95 through 100. One thing to note is that we will be giving every tower a MIB to make sure they can damage every balloon type, but other than that, they're on their own. But this let the Ultra Juggernaut beat all sorts of rounds. The 3 bads that come on round 119, the super dense ZOMGs and BFBs of round 137, and the 126 DDTs of round 138. But what finally took it down was the fortified bad on 140. It just had too much health to take out by the exit. Onto the Plasma Monkey fan club. This guy just needs a really long map, so his ability has time to come off cooldown. So we made him a straight line from corner to corner that the balloons run back and forth on, and gave him a tech bot to always use his ability. This worked great until round 72, where his base mode made a Regrow Farm too big for his plasma version to take out. So this is his limit. But his true power comes in his ability to transform other monkeys, so we backed him up with 19 other dart monkeys and gave them MIBs as well. This does go against part of the video, so his official score is 72, but I want to see how far these could go. They crushed all the way through the early hundreds, taking out huge hordes of balloons no problem, and the cooldown is short enough to not really have to worry about it. But all good things have to come to an end, and for the PMFC it was round 138. They just couldn't pop all the DDTs before they raced to the exit. Next is the Crossbow Master. I tried on a very long and straight map to give him plenty of time to take out all the balloons in case he was pierce capped. This worked great until round 76, where the extra track gave the balloons time to regrow and overpower the dart monkey. So we switched this up and made a shorter map where he can almost always attack. This did much better as he blew through round 76 no problem and was even able to beat the bad on round 100. But where he really struggles is against a map full of balloons where they cap out his pierce. And that's exactly what round 103 did, which is the round that bested him. Onto the Glaive Lord. I was debating between this map and one that's a skinny oval, but I think they'd be about the same. At the start, he was one-shotting everything and we were hauling through the rounds. He's a pretty balanced tower with his tons of pierce, decent damage, and the shred damage over time effect for the first balloon he hits. This let him get to the hundreds pretty easily and even take down the 3 bads on round 119. But this was the first time that he struggled, showing that bads are his weakness. He continued on for the next 20 rounds, popping everything without fear of losing, but it was the fortified bad on 140 that finally took him down. The Glaive Lord was able to pop the outer layer in time, but the DDTs inside were able to leak. Next, we have the Perma Charge. I wasn't sure what crosspath to make him, as the 250 has more pierce, but the 052 has more damage. I guessed the extra damage would be helpful against round 119, so I went with that option. This crushed the rounds, including the 3 bads that I was worried about, but was taken out shortly after by the obnoxious number of fortified BFBs that come on round 124. It was clear that he got pierce capped long enough for the balloons to leak, so I bought a continue and tried it again with a 250 for that extra pierce, and it did much better. Not only beating the round, but it seemed like he did it with plenty of time left. And the best part was that it wasn't round 140 that took us out. Nope, it was 138 with all those DDTs. Even here, he maxed out his pierce, so we don't have to worry about the other crosspath doing better. But round 138 is his score. Shifting gears, we have the Moab Domination. I put him at the very end of a long straightaway and watched him smoke everything that got in his range. Even rounds like 137 and 138 weren't a match for him. But he didn't use this long straightaway as well as I thought he would. Sure, his ranks would hit a bunch of things on the track, but he could really only reach about a fourth of it, and this caused him to leak some ceramics inside the fortified bad of 140. But I had a bad feeling about this placement, so I moved him to the center and tried again. And boy did this do better. Not only did he beat this round, but he went back to crushing the rounds after. Sure, the bads would take him a bit to pop, but everything else was a piece of cake. That is, until he faced round 163 and its insane number of ceramics and leads. There were so many on screen that I had no idea how far they were, and my computer even lagged a bit. But eventually, some made it to the finish line and ended our run. Next up, we have the Bloon Crush. This guy would either one-shot the balloons or stall them until they were no more. It was pretty satisfying to watch, but I was happy I had the faster forward mod on, so this didn't take hours. Just 20 minutes. But at some point, the unstunnable balloons had to start coming. Round 100 got surprisingly far, but this guy's 24 damage was enough to eventually take out the outer layer, and he popped the insides no problem. He went back to popping ZOMGs and below easily, but the bads will be back. and on 119, the 3 of them were too tanky and fast to take out before leaking. Onto the Moab Eliminator. I placed him down on around 41 like most other towers in this video, and he was instantly struggling. It's no secret that he specializes in Moab damage, but I was not expecting this. Anyway, he managed to pop all the balloons several laps into the map and took on the regrows of 42. I didn't think anything of it, but before long he'd taken out all the normal balloons and left us with a massive regrow farm too big to take out. I even gave him a second try, but the regrows were too much for him. So we have a new lowest round of only 42. What isn't weak to normal balloons though is the bomb blitz. This hauled through the rounds, making light work of even the early hundreds. I mean, these massive rushes of BFBs, ZMGs, and even DDTs were a non-issue. But we all know it doesn't have the most single target damage, so it probably lost to round 119, right? Wrong. They lived a while, but he managed to beat the round and move on. I thought this meant he'd go all the way to the fortified bad on 140, but it was actually the 18 fortified ZOMGs on round 131 that beat him. While he does have a ton of pierce and can even pop bads, he could not get through these tanky layers in time. Moving on, we have the Inferno Ring, the top path tack shooter. I made sure to put this guy inside a loop and put him on a very long map to get the most out of his main attacks and global meteor. His fire melted any bloom that came in his range, and the meteor was popping blimps in just a few seconds. I mean, he even popped the fortified bad on round 140. Sure, it took him a while to break it down and beat the round, but that thing has so much health. And after he popped that, I wasn't sure what would beat him. Now, bads come just about every round after 140, and they'd be the last thing standing every time, but he just kept popping them. And in the end, they weren't even what took him down. Nope, it was a screen full of ZOMGs and DDTs. The green turtles ate up all the meteor's pierce, while the little spiders whizzed through the map at the speed of light, leaking on round 151. Next, we have the Super Maelstrom. I put him in the same spot as the Inferno Ring, as it'll give him plenty of time to get his ability off cooldown with each use. As expected, his main attack didn't do much, even against the easy balloons in the 40s, but the second he popped his ability, the screen would be cleansed. I personally loved rounds 64 and 65, as the timings on his abilities were perfect. What was nice was that he seemed to do well against all types of balloons. Huge rushes were countered by his insane pierce, and the tanky ones like ZOMGs and bads were slow enough to take several point-blank abilities. But health scales with every round, and eventually these things would be too healthy to pop in time. And for the Smail, it was the fortified ZOMGs of 135. I was impressed as he popped all the fortified DDTs at the start of the round, which was my guess for what would eventually leak. Onto the tack zone, a fan favorite tower. I put him in the same spot as the other tack shooters and watched him pop everything at the very start of the track. The only balloons that might get by were those inside of Moabs, and they were quickly picked up on their way back to the start. I was so confident in this guy as I've used him in so many Black Border and boss event runs, and here he was even popping BFBs in one lap. But it was weird seeing him without a primary training or alchemist next to him, and this missing pierce and damage caught up to him quick. On round 76, he made a regrow farm big enough to take out a city. Now, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and tried again on a straight line map so the balloons didn't have as much time to regenerate, but he did it again here. He had the attack speed and projectiles, he just needed more damage and or pierce to beat the round. Now, I need to cool off after that disappointing performance, so we're going over to Ice Monkeys. I put the Super Brittle where the Inferno Ring was and watched him wreak havoc. His ice shards were tearing the balloons apart, and the ceramics were getting frozen until they popped. His obvious weakness, though, was Moabs. Even on round 50, they made it several laps around before popping. This only happened if there weren't other balloons around, though, because sometimes we'd pop blimps right away with the ice shards from other balloons being popped. So we just had to hope it'd line up like this. It was funny to watch because sometimes we'd insta-pop BFBs, and other times I'd do several laps around the track, like on round 75. I assumed this meant he'd lose to round 80, but somehow he managed to pop the ZOMG and all the insides before they leaked. It had to be close with how long it took, but impressive nonetheless. He continued to slowly move through the rounds, whittling down Moab class balloons until he got down to just ceramics, and he'd use those to end the round quickly. But it was round 85 that took him down. These slightly faster and healthier ZMGs were too much, as some ceramics got through. Next, we have the Arctic Wind. This guy would slow balloons down to a crawl and pop them ever so slowly, with his ability being popped constantly by a tech bot. It was kind of painful to watch, even in super fast forward mode. What was even worse though, was watching Moabs do lap after lap, only taking a couple damage with each ability and attack. But this slow, combined with a tiny amount of damage, was enough to whittle them down. Did it take several minutes per round? Yes. But it was working, so I couldn't complain. What I did like was when a couple mobs would pop and all their ceramics would get stuck in his Arctic aura, like at the end of round 58. That was satisfying. But eventually we faced a blimp that was too tough for us to handle, and for him it was the BFB. This red lobster ever so slowly made its way through the map. We only popped his outer layer 1.5 laps away from the exit, which is nowhere near long enough for our Arctic wind to pop the Moabs inside. On to the most fun ice monkey, we have the Icicle Impale. This one we put in the middle of a straight line map to max out its pierce and let it attack as often as possible. Unlike the others, it popped the balloons and blimps no problem, and was still satisfying to watch, especially round 63. But I figured it would start struggling once it got pierce capped in the 90s, but that didn't seem to be the case. It took out Moab layers quickly and then just froze the ceramics until they were all gone. I mean, even round 98 wasn't that scary. It took out several BFBs with each pass, and the balloons inside weren't a problem, making for a pretty easy round. I mean, it even did enough damage to the bad to pop the outer layer in just 5 laps, which is only about a fifth of the way through the map. I honestly had no idea how far this guy would go, but that old pierce cap thing finally caught up to him on round 104. While not hard to take out individually, 175 Moabs and 39 BFBs proved to be too much for him. On to everyone's favorite monkey, the Bloons Solver. I put him at the very end of the long straightaway, as this will give the corrosive glue plenty of time to damage balloons while they're out of his range. It'll let him use more of his pierce on average, and the balloons will always be running over the puddles popped ones leave on the track. As expected, he started melting his way through the rounds. BFBs and under would be popped in a couple seconds, and once the puddles got on the track, it was over. I especially liked rounds 75 and 76 because we got to see him shred dense packs of ceramics as if there was nothing there. He didn't slow down until ZOMG started coming in the 80s, but it didn't take too long to get through this outer layer. And if he damaged these green turtles with acid puddles, it went even faster, like on round 94 where we got through all but one of the ZOMGs on their first pass. ZOMGs aren't the toughest balloons though, so let's fast forward to the bad. Here, on round 100, it took 13 laps around the map before he got through the outer layer, which is over halfway through the map. What's nice is that he popped the DDTs inside pretty quick, and the ZOMGs were handled like usual. Throughout the early hundreds, the hardest thing to deal with were the fortified ZOMGs, as they're pretty tanky, but once he took one down, the rest would fall shortly after like a line of dominoes. He countered dense waves like 104 and 105 no problem, and even took on the fast DDTs without issue. But eventually, he had to face more bads, and the 3 that come on run 119 were too much. He actually managed to pop some of the outer layers, but the DDTs inside the second one made it to the exit. Next, we have the Glue Storm, a support monkey. I made him a 250 so his glue would do some damage, and we used a tech bot to spam his ability. To start, his main attack would get him through the rounds, but this actually sped up quite a bit when he'd rain glue on everything. I guess that extra damage really helps when you're only dealing 1 damage every couple seconds. I was a bit worried about Moabs once getting to the 50s, but he actually did a good job at taking them out. I mean, he even beat round 60's BFB without leaking, though it did take a very long time. What's funny is he could handle ceramic rushes of any size without issue, as his glue storm would affect them all, but the second a fortified Moab or BFB was brought into the mix, it took him forever to beat the round. It makes sense, but it was pretty dramatic of him, like on round 78 where the BFB lived much longer than anything else, even though it spawns in the middle of the round. But it was the ZOMG that eventually beat him. He did manage to get through the ZOMG and BFB layers, but the Moabs ended up leaking. There was just no way his low-level corrosive glue could do enough damage in time. Moving on, we have the Super Glue. The nice thing about him is that his base attack deals damage to Moab class balloons, and everything that he glues takes 20 damage every 2 seconds, meaning we can crosspath him as a 025 to give him more pierce for the balloon heavy rounds later on. I put him on the straight line to make sure he could always make use of his glue splatters, and he started chugging through the rounds. Any balloon he glued was brought to a halt and would disappear shortly after. Even Moabs were popped pretty quick. This continued to be the case even on rounds 79 and 80, as he popped the huge number of Regrow rainbows no problem, and he dealt with the tanky blimp layers as if they were nothing. I mean, he even popped almost the entire ZOMG on the first pass. His limited pierce did start to show itself in the 90s, but his constant stuns and corrosive glue were enough to get him through the rounds. Honestly, the scariest round was 95, as the DDTs were hauling when he couldn't splatter them all, but once he cleared most of the map, he caught up and emptied the screen. He managed to make his way through the 90s, but then he had to face the bad. The balloon he can't slow or stun, and all he can do is shoot it as it floats by and hope he does enough damage. And did he ever? He popped the outer layer after about 9 laps around the track and the inside shortly after. Pretty impressive, but early into the hundreds he was pierce capped again, and on round 103 there were just too many balloons for him. Eventually some ceramics got through, ending the run. Shifting gears, we have the Cripple Moab, our first military monkey. I made this guy a 520 as I figured his shrapnel would help a ton once there are a bunch of balloons on screen. And I put him at the end of the straight map so his shrapnel would have the highest chance of hitting other balloons. At the start, he was one-shotting everything, even fortified ceramics, and once Moab started coming, it only took a couple shots to take them out too. This continued for quite some time, but started to get fun in the 90s. Here, there'd be enough blimps on screen that you just randomly see some getting stunned by the shrapnel, and I left the sniper on first to make sure he'd take out any children's ceramics that were surely leading the charge. But the first scary round was 95, as there were so many purple and lead balloons eating up his Pierce, and I couldn't tell how far along the track everything was, especially once the DDTs and Moabs got involved. Honestly, I have no idea how he managed to whittle down this round, but I'm happy he made it through. Round 100 was much easier than any of the other 90s, as he got to make better use of his single target damage. I mean, each shot does 280 damage, so it's no surprise he popped this outer layer in just over a lap. And there weren't enough children balloons to overwhelm him, so the DDTs and ZOMGs inside were not an issue. What was too much for him though was round 104, as the screen was full of purples, leads, ceramics, Moabs, and BFBs. Way too much for his bullets and shrapnel to get through, so this was his limit. Next, we have the Elite Sniper. We made him a 250 for that extra damage and put him on the straight map to get the most out of his shrapnel. For the first several rounds, he kept the balloons at the entrance, but that changed once Moab started coming. They'd survive about half a lap on the round, and the balloons behind them would be safe until they got within bouncing range. In fact, he did much better versus Moabs when other blimps or balloons were around, because he'd get way more shrapnel to damage them. This was great, and even rounds like 63 and 64 went off without a hitch. I did not expect this to keep working in the 90s though, when the RBE shoots through the roof, but he even managed to take out round 98. The BFBs started to get popped on the first lap, and their outer layers were fully taken out by the end of lap 4. The ZOMGs took a little bit longer to pop, but he still managed to beat the round without any real fears of leaking. What was scary though was round 100. The Bad did almost 20 laps before breaking down into ZOMGs and DDTs. Luckily, the insides were dealt with much faster than the outer layer, but boy, those ceramics had to be within a lap or two of leaking. But just like the cripple Moab, round 104 overwhelmed our boy. This round has claimed so many monkeys already, and I think it's going to continue. But now we're on to the Elite Defender. We made this guy a 025 for that beautiful shrapnel and put him at the end of the straightaway just like the cripple Moab. This tore through the rounds incredibly fast, with nothing getting too far until round 63. Here, the ceramics and leads made it a few laps in before getting popped, but our sniper quickly caught up. One thing to remember about this guy is that he gets more attack speed the farther the balloons get along the track, so things could look grim and he might pull off a miracle. But then round 76 came and he made a massive Regrow Farm. It didn't matter if I put him on first or last, his shrapnel kept multiplying the balloons beyond our control. So we had to sell him and make a 205 Elite Defender to beat the round. This worked very well, popping the round in just over 6 laps. But now, we have to continue on without shrapnel, meaning waves with tons of balloons will be tough for us. This really showed itself in the 90s as we popped each ZOMG, BFB, Moab, and ceramic one at a time, while the others marched closer and closer to the exit. It wasn't painful to watch, but it felt like our sniper was going through a checklist, checking off each round one blimp or balloon at a time. Round 95 was scary for this guy as well, as the whole map was full of Moabs at the end, and I had no idea how far along the track they were. But slowly, he brought them all down. What was nice was how fast he dealt with the Bad. This extra damage let him pop the outer layer just over 1 lap into the track, giving him more than enough time to pop the ZOMGs and DDTs inside. Just like the other snipers though, the early hundreds were brutal. He managed to get through the hundreds of balloons on 101, the 30 DDTs and miscellaneous blimps of 102, but the 150 Moabs and 10 fortified ZOMGs of round 103 were too much. So he lost 1 round before the other 2 tier 5 snipers. Moving on, we have submarines, starting with the Energizer. I put this guy in the middle of a long oval-shaped map and instinctively made him a 520. This might be the wrong crosspath, but the extra damage to DDTs could be nice. Anyway, he started off popping the balloons insanely fast, but blimps were a different story. Even Moabs would make it a lap around the map, which does not bode well for the future. Luckily, BFBs were slow enough that they would only make it about a lap in before getting broken down to Moabs, so it wasn't like they were already getting super far into the map. The fortified versions were a bit harder though, as those braced lobsters actually made it pretty far. Luckily, we could still pop the fortified ceramics inside in a single pass, but the ZOMG on round 80 is where I started getting nervous. This guy did 4.5 laps before breaking down to BFBs, and the insides got a bit farther, meaning the balloons are already getting about halfway through the map. The nice thing though is that Pierce won't be an issue with this guy, as his radioactive attack can hit 1,000 balloons at a time. So even though we're facing more and more balloons, that wasn't the reason they were getting farther and farther. No, it's because they get slightly more health and speed with each round. This showed itself on 96 as the ZMGs almost completed their 8th lap before breaking down to BFBs, and their insides lasted longer than round 80s as well. But what finally did this guy in were the fortified ZMGs on 97. They were just too tanky to pop in time, and the Moabs inside made it to the exit. But because we have a MIB and the Energizer is in charge of the damage, the other crosspaths should do better. So we tried again with a 502, and he actually managed to beat the round. It still took forever, but he moved on. And we can tell that the extra lead damage didn't make the difference versus DDTs, because he was able to pop all the fortified ones on round 99 as well. But it was the bad on round 100 that leaked. And honestly, it wasn't even close. Onto the preemptive strike. We put him in the same spot as the Energizer and made him a 052, as there weren't any other monkeys that he could take advantage of with advanced intel. So Airburst Darts was the obvious choice. He plowed through the rounds, popping the Bloons on their first pass, and Moabs would be taken down to ceramics with a preemptive missile. Things didn't really get past the sub until the late 70s, where fortified BFBs could tank this missile when entering the map. But even then, they were popped before finishing a single lap around the track. And the ZMG on round 80 was popped this fast too. But then round 81 came and Super Ceramic started appearing. We could instantly tell the difference because he wasn't one-shotting them like he was a round ago. If you didn't know, all ceramics are replaced with Super Ceramics on rounds 81 and up. This means their outer shells have 60 health instead of 10, but they only spawn one line of children. This makes them harder to take out, but reduces lag and free play, which is part of the reason why towers start to struggle after beating round 80. Anyway, ceramics now take a little longer to take out, but that didn't mean much to the sub, especially when we started using his ability in the late 80s. And with this, he even made hard rounds like 98 look easy. He took down the blimps pretty quick, but it was easy to see that Pierce was his problem, not damage. This did mean he was able to beat the 3 bads on 119 pretty easily. His ability let him chunk through the outer layers quickly, giving him time to clean up the insides. But his Pierce problems eventually caught up to him on around 128, as the BFBs ate up a ton of his Pierce, not letting him pop all the fortified DDTs in time. Next, we have the Submarine Commander. He was popping Bloons and Blimps alike super fast, as nothing made it past him until round 63, where each wave of ceramics made it to the back half of the track. I mean, even the fortified Moabs on 64 were getting deleted once they were in his range. This slowed down in the 80s and 90s though, as Super Ceramics took several attacks to break down and there were enough blimps to cap out his Pierce. He was still making good progress though, as even round 95 didn't get too far into the track. And he made the bad look pretty easy, popping the outer layer just a couple laps in, and he took out the DDTs shortly after. The other children lasted a lap or two more, but there was absolutely nothing to worry about. But the few rounds after that were rough to say the least. He somehow got past the fortified ZMGs on 103, but round 104 was too much, just like several monkeys before him. Moving on, we have the Carrier Flagship. We ran back the same map, as this gives the planes so much time to shoot and lets both sides of the buck fire once the balloons start getting far. But this was one of the most dominant performances we've seen in a while. No balloon really got out of the entrance until the 80s, and even here he was popping them in under a lap. I mean, he even took out round 104 pretty quick. Normally, the Moabs on this round fill the entire track until something leaks, but this guy took them all out in a few laps, leaving only the BFBs for him to work on. So he was able to handle crazy numbers in terms of balloons, but his damage was solid too. He popped all the fortified DDTs and ZOMGs on round 118 without any real fears of leaking, and the bads on 119 weren't too tough either. The first bad was popped just a few laps in, and the final one was popped about halfway through the track. He even started taking on rounds that were in the millions of RBE, like round 137 that has 18 ZMGs, 24 BFBs, and 48 Moabs. Talk about a lot of balloons to pop. But eventually this guy had to lose, and it was to round 138. The 81 fortified DDTs and 45 normal ones were finally enough to get through. I honestly couldn't tell how many he popped, but the map was starting to thin out, so he got pretty close to getting them all. Next, we have the Pirate Lord. His main attack popped all the balloons when they got in his range, and his ability one-shot any blimps he could get his hooks on. This made the early game go pretty quick, and was funny to watch rounds like 86 where he'd pull in every blimp of the round. But even on rounds where there were more blimps than hooks, it drastically lowered the RBE of the round, making it much easier for his cannons to take out the rest. Like on round 98, where he pulled in 2 ZOMGs or 6 BFBs with every ability. As for the bad on round 100, it took 2.5 laps to pop the outer layer, and his hooks did the rest. But this was kind of the theme for the hundreds. cannons. He would be doing tons of damage with his main attack, especially since the map was full of blimps, so all of his cannons would be making contact, and his ability would activate several times per round. This worked on basically every combo of balloons. Fortified ZOMGs weren't an issue as hooks didn't care about how tanky they were, DDTs weren't difficult because he could hook in 6 of them per use, and BFBs and blow were handled by his main attacks. But eventually, he had to take on a blimp too big for hooks and cannons, and for the Pirate Lord, it was the Fortified Bad on round 140. He just couldn't break that outer layer by the time it reached the end of the map. Onto the best Buccaneer upgrade, the Trade Empire. We had to make him a 025 for some extra damage, as he's usually used to make money, not pop balloons. Even with this not being his forte, he was still doing alright. He'd pop most balloons on their first pass, and Moabs in about a lap. This changed once BFBs or large ceramic rushes started coming through though, as he doesn't have the most pierce or damage, making these rounds pretty tough. Still, he had plenty of track to work with, and nothing was getting that far. I was getting worried about the ZOMGs and super ceramics that come in the 80s and 90s, but before we could get there, round 79 happened. At the time, I wasn't even thinking about a Regrow Farm because he took out 76 so easily, but because there were so many rainbows on top of each other, he just didn't have the pierce to finish off each individual balloon, causing them to multiply and overwhelm him. So 79 is where his run ends. Moving on, we have the Sky Shredder. I put him on the long oval map, set him to Wing Monkey, and hit play. He was destroying the rounds, which makes sense as he's a chimp's carry, but he even made the likes of 98 and 99 look easy, and he didn't stop there. The early hundreds that have given so many of our towers trouble were no problem for him. Sure, when he'd pass over a huge horde of blimps, we'd see that he was getting pierce capped, but the damage output was crazy and he was clearing these rounds pretty quick. I suppose firing 32 darts and a couple missiles constantly really takes a toll on the balloons. It wasn't just huge numbers that he was good against though, as he took out the 3 bads on round 119 only a quarter of the way through the map. As for DDTs, he was able to pop the 99 that come on round 126. Now, I couldn't tell exactly how far they got, but by the looks of it, they got about halfway to the exit. And this makes sense as it was the fortified DDTs that ended up leaking on round 138. They finally had the health, numbers, and speed to get by our monkey ace. Next, we have the Tsar Bomba. I put him on the straight line map to get more out of his bombs that only drop on the track. This way, they should hit more balloons with each explosion. We also set up a tech bot to be dropping his nuke whenever it's ready, and this came in handy a lot sooner than I thought it would. Like on rounds 78 and 79, where the balloons would start to get far until he dropped his bomb. Now, I'm sure he would have been able to pop them all, but it was nice resetting the screen with each ability. This explosion affects up to 5,000 balloons, so we should never really have to worry about its pierce being capped, as having that many balloons on screen would be a bit absurd. I mean, even in the early hundreds, where other towers have been put to the test, every balloon was being affected by the bomb, letting us cruise through these rounds. This was especially nice on ones with DDTs, as they'd be hauling through the map like usual just to get deleted by this ability. So it's clear that this guy's weakness is a strong single target, and on round 140, the fortified bad took us out. He actually got really close to popping it as it was covered in bandages, but he still would have had to get through the DDTs and ZOMGs inside. Onto the Flying Fortress, one of the most expensive upgrades in the game. This guy has an absurd amount of damage, so we're jumping straight to round 140, where he managed to pop the fortified bad in just over 3 laps around the map, and the insides were cleaned up no problem. So he still had 75% of the track left to work with. Over the next several rounds, he fought all sorts of weird combos, popping several bads in a round, fighting bads layered on top of DDTs and CMGs. I mean, he even took on round 163's weird rushes of leads and ceramics. And for that one, he held the entire round to the very start of the track. But as things gained more health and speed, they got farther and farther along the track, to the point where each round took a few minutes to complete. Not the biggest deal in the world, but it was one of the reasons why I installed the faster forward mod for other towers. But in the end, it wasn't even a bad that took him out. It was fortified DDTs layered on top of BFBs and Moabs. This made it difficult for a flying fortress to damage them, as the colored blimps were essentially armor. So round 183 is where he lost. Next, we have the Apache Prime, and we made him a 502 for that extra attack speed. This guy also has quite some popping power, so we'll be jumping straight to round 119. Here, he took on the 3 bads, popping the last of them in just over 4 laps. Now, leaving him on pursuit is very nice as he tracks the frontmost balloon, but it also works very well on this map as he always seems to be shooting right down the straightaway, so he should get the most out of his pierce. This was shown to be the case in the 130s, as there were times where you could see the plasma and or laser attacks hit their pierce cap and stop flying along the track. And because he got to make use of his pierce, he handled ZOMGs and DDTs just fine, bringing him back to the bads on round 140. Here, his damage was truly tested, and he came out on top. Something interesting though, is that he's one of the only towers that popped the fortified bad before the normal one. Usually, the remaining attacks would damage the normal bad enough to pop it first, but because of how his pursuit mode worked out, the normal one actually outlived the fortified one. Anyway, he kept plowing through the rounds after this, taking on bads, DDTs, and all sorts of blimp combinations. But what finally bested him was round 154. Similar to the Flying Fortress, there were just too many layers of balloons. Fortified DDTs on top of BFVs on top of Moabs, and this layered protection was enough to escort a DDT to the exit. Moving on, we have the Special Operations Heli Pilot, and he got to play on the long Christmas-themed oval map. Why his helipad got placed below the gingerbread cookies, I don't know, but I kinda love it. Anyway, we had a tech bot spamming his Marine, and between these two, they kept popping the balloons at the start of the track for a while. If you didn't know, the Marine is pretty strong with 6 damage and 20 pierce, and he made rounds like 98 and 99 look a bit silly. These stats on the Marine are nice, but what's truly impressive is its attack speed, as he looks like a super monkey with how fast he's shooting. But after they broke the bad, they had to take on the hundreds. The balloons got farther with each round, but the 120s are where things actually took a while to pop. Whether it was fortified ZOMGs, DDTs, or just a ton of blimps in general, it was a bit scary as it was hard to see how far everything was getting, especially once the heli started blowing back ceramics to earlier parts of the track. But what eventually made it to the exit was a DDT on round 138. Another round leader for ending runs, this huge number of DDTs has proven difficult for a single tower to take out. On to the last heli pilot, we have the Comanche Commander, aka the Com. I put him on the straight line map because I figured his pursuit mode would work similar to the Apache Prime and would get a lot out of his pierce. This was the case for the most part, letting him destroy rounds like 95, but because the 3 mini helis are grouped next to him, some of their darts were shot at an angle, so less of them used their full pierce on average. We can't avoid this though, so I moved on. It was fun watching him pursue the balloons, as most other towers in the game are stationary, but an added benefit was his Moab shove. You could tell when the blimp started to thin out because you could see him start to slow the ones in front, and it was nice to know this was always happening, even if there were too many balloons on screen to see it. He made his way through the early hundreds and took down the 3 bads on 119 about a quarter of the way through the map. I guess that's what happens when you have a tower firing 19 darts with every attack. But after these bads, he worked his way through the 120s and 30s, dealing millions of damage just like the towers before him. But like some others, round 138 put a stop to his reign of terror. Once again, the 126 DDTs were too much. Next, we have the biggest one. I made it a 502 for that beautiful burn damage and watched it one-shot any balloon it hit. I mean, even fortified Moabs were getting popped in an attack or two, and the ceramics inside would only take one more hit to wipe out. This was super nice for 63 and 64, but pretty quickly we found ourselves in the 90s. And even here, the biggest one was having a field day. He popped all of round 96 in just one loop around, and the fortified ZOMGs of 97 only made it a lap and a half in. This guy is known for his damage and pierce, but that burn effect we gave him makes him especially lethal, as it burns all balloons for 50 damage every 0.625 seconds, which is super nice, especially against bads. Speaking of which, he popped the outer layer of the 3 bads on 119 in just 4 laps, giving him plenty of time to burn the insides and move on to the 120s. Here, he seemed to counter every round. If they were tanky and slow, like ZOMGs, he had plenty of time to break them down. And if they were weak and fast, like DDTs or Moabs, he'd pop them in just a few attacks. I mean, even the crazy DDT round of 138 was no match for him. It only took a couple seconds and they were all gone. But then the fortified bad came on round 140. He managed to pop the outer layer and the normal bad, but the DDTs inside the fortified one got to the exit. Onto the Papana. I set his targeting to the center of the map, where his explosions would hit as many balloons as possible most of the time, and we used a tech bot to use his ability whenever it was up. This stuns balloons and deals 20 damage per second for 8 seconds. The combination of his attack and ability kept the screen pretty clear of balloons until the ZOMGs started coming in the 80s, but even here he cleaned them up pretty quick, especially if they got stunned in range of his attacks. But the balloon he can't stun came on round 100. I wasn't sure how far it'd make it, but his damage added up, popping the outer layer in just 6 slaps, and the insides were easy to deal with. As for the early hundreds, the Papana was a solid counter. No bads come, and his ability affects the whole screen, so whether it was DDTs, ZOMGs, or weaker, they were all getting stunned and taking constant damage. Enough to where nothing was really scary. I mean, he even had enough damage to beat round 119, which I thought would take him out for sure. He kept plowing through the rounds, and it looked like he was going to make it all the way to 140, but then tragedy struck. Round 138 came with all its DDTs. They very quickly filled the screen and were flying through the map. The Papana got 2 abilities off while they were rushing towards the exit, but the ceramics inside the final fortified DDT got through. Talk about close. Next, we have the Bloons incineration, and we put him on the same map so that the Bloons would have to pass through his walls of fire over and over again. This made the Bloonson one of the faster towers we've used so far, as even in the 90s, he was breaking down the blimps and Bloons in the blink of an eye. In just one pass, he'd get almost everything to Moabs or ceramics, and the rest would melt away the next time they made it to the center. This gets made even easier because he would remove the fortified property from BFBs and below, drastically reducing the damage needed to win. He kept on cruising through the rounds, but I wasn't sure how he'd do against bads, and on round 119 he showed that they weren't a problem, popping their outer layers about a quarter of the way through the map, and the insides only made it a couple laps farther. Now, it is a bit unfortunate that he can't strip the fortified property off ZOMGs and DDTs, as these are prevalent in the 120s and 30s, but he was doing just fine. I mean, even the horde of DDTs on 138 popped pretty quick, which I was not expecting. But then it was time for the fortified bad on round 140. The outer layer has 200,000 HP, not to mention the insides, and yet somehow the Bloonson managed to pop the bad layer on its 18th lap, giving us just enough time to pop the insides. They were very close to leaking, but once he popped the ZOMGs and stripped that property, the BFBs and below were wiped out. The next several rounds all played out about the same. The map would be full of some combination of ZOMGs, DDTs, and occasionally a bad, but no matter how many there were, he'd slowly melt the Bloons down until there were just bads left, and he'd slowly pop them. And this continued until round 153, where the bad was finally too fast and strong to be popped in time. The sad part was we lost to the ceramics inside the final couple Moabs, so he was very close to making it to the next round. Moving on, we have the Ray of Doom. This was actually the first monkey I recorded, and it was before I spiced up the maps. Obviously, we put him on a long straightaway and had him fire down the entire thing, and he was putting on a show. When I say he kept the balloons off the screen, I mean I literally didn't see a balloon until ZOMG started coming, and even then it was only for a split second. The 90s are where we finally got to see some balloons enter the map, but even then it was short-lived. I never thought I'd root for the balloons. But I was wishing they'd get stronger and faster to make this more of a challenge for him. Fast forward to round 140, where we took on the fortified bad. He popped this entire round in just 5 laps, and it would have been faster if the normal bad didn't tank some of the attacks. If you didn't know, the Ray of Doom does tons of extra damage to the first target it hits, so even though it has 1,000 pierce, you want the tankiest balloon to be his first target. But we can't really control that this late into free play. Anyway, he continued on, popping everything along the track. Each round he'd pop Moabs and DDTs first, then whittle down ZOMGs and BFBs until he was only left with a few bads to deal with. These bads would live on for several laps, being laser shocked the entire time. Once we got to round 176, these whales were living for over 10 laps, and their insides took a few more to take out. So it was no surprise when something finally leaked. I was hoping he'd make it to round 200, but 185 is where he lost. The screen was full of fortified ZOMGs and DDTs that were protecting 3 bads from getting hit by the first attack. Once only the bads were left, the rod was able to pop the outer layer of all 3, but the DDTs inside the last one made it out. Onto the Mad, the Moab Destroyer. This guy does insane damage to blimps, but isn't that good against normal balloons. I'm hoping putting him on a long map will help him overcome this weakness. Right off the bat, he was one-shotting the Moabs, but the ceramics inside would make it a lap or 2. Luckily, his ability would help catch him up whenever activated, and the map was long enough for us to not worry about the cooldown. This was a funny change of pace because he would destroy ZOMGs and below in the blink of an eye, and then we'd be sitting around waiting for him to finish off the ceramics. It was basically the opposite of every other monkey we've done so far. A good showing of this was round 96, where he popped all the Moabs and BFBs right away, and then there were so many ceramics it actually took a bit for the missiles to be able to reach the ZOMGs, and then he needed 2 rocket storms to pop the super ceramics. But this balloon weakness did catch up to him on round 103. The 150 Moabs and 10 ZOMGs just had too many ceramics inside for him to deal with. He got off 3 rocket storms this round and made a huge dent in the balloons, but some still managed to reach the exit. Next, we have the balloon exclusion zone, aka the Bez. I started him on a shorter straight map so that his projectiles would hit the balloons no matter where they were on the track. This let him fly through the rounds, even beating the likes of 104 with tons of track left to spare. The only issue was we could see him getting pierce capped the entire time. I mean, even on round 106, his shots couldn't hit all the DDTs. So that begs the question, would he do better on a longer map that he can't always attack, but the balloons would be more spread out, or will he do better here? We'll test that in a bit. For now, he continued on, popping the rounds, but they were getting pretty far pretty quick. The only round he didn't struggle with was round 119, where he comfortably popped the bads, but this was due to there only being 3 Bloons on screen for most of the round, and this Pierce issue showed itself on round 124 as the 75 BFBs were way too much for him to handle. He was still working all the Moabs down to ceramics once things started leaking, but what if the map was longer? I moved him over to the middle of the long straight map and let him run free. He made his way to round 124 and popped it no problem. In fact, he continued on through the 120s and 30s with no issues. Whether it was DDTs, ZMGs, or anything else, he plowed through. He even made it to the fortified bad on 140, where he popped its outer layer in about 5 laps. Pretty impressive for a monkey that lost 16 rounds ago on a shorter map. But eventually he had to lose, and like many monkeys before him, it was on round 151 where the map was full of blimps that were protecting DDTs, and one made it to the exit. But I had a feeling if we ran this back with the Bez on the end of the track, he'd do even better. It doesn't really make sense because he can't see the entire track, but I put him at the end and had him fired on the map just like the Rod and Mad. He made it to round 151 and beat it. Now, we might have just gotten lucky as the rounds are random here, but he continued on for a few more before leaking. On round 156, he ran into the same issue as before, and some DDTs made it to the exit pretty early into the round, but this is his upper limit. Shifting gears, we have our first magic monkey, and what's more magic-y than a wizard? Specifically an Archmage. I put him in the middle of the longest map we have and hit play. His Seeking Bolts came in clutch here as he could shoot on one side of the track and they'd loop back to hit more balloons using more of his Pierce on average. And we could feel his extra blimp damage as he even popped round 104 in a reasonable time. After just a few laps, we could see the Moabs start to thin out, and after they were mostly gone, the BFBs started breaking down as well. I mean, even fortified ZMGs didn't last too long versus this guy. He continued on, making it to the 120s and 30s. Things were getting farther and farther each round, but he was still holding strong. Round 137 came with its absurd 1.1 million RBE, and he handled it like a champ. Then round 138 came with all its DDTs, and while it looked incredibly scary with how long they were lasting, he managed to pop them all before leaking. They had to be super close, but he didn't lose a single life. Round 139 was similar in that the map was full of blimps for way too long, but eventually he popped them all. But then it was time for round 140, and the bad was too much. He got through the outer layers and even popped the DDTs inside, but the last of the super ceramics made it through. Next, we have the Wizard Lord Phoenix. I made him a 052 for that extra range and pierce. We put him on the straight line map to get the most out of his non-seeking attacks and his wall of fire. He didn't really use these in the beginning though, because the permanent Phoenix kept the balloons at the entrance until BFB started coming in the 70s. Once our wizard did attack though, the balloons didn't last too long. I didn't even start using his ability until round 111, as this is where the fortified ZMGs worried me just a little bit. But the second we called upon the lava chicken, I knew we were in safe hands. Just a couple of uses and the round was no more. Before using this ability, I was worried about his Pierce, but once I saw the meteors cruising through massive hordes of balloons, like on round 137, I knew we'd be fine for a while. Each of the lava chicken's meteors has 300 Pierce and deals 50 damage, so it's pretty tough to use all of them up. This was enough to pop the fortified bad and move on to the random rounds. He made it through the 140s where we dealt with the usual layered blimps and 1 to 3 bads each round, but what finally took him down was around 152. He managed to pop all the DDTs and fortified ZMGs, but the final bad lasted just a little too long and its insides got through. Onto one of the coolest looking towers in the game, the Prince of Darkness. We put him in about the same spot as the Wizard Lord Phoenix to get the most out of his wall of fire, and it'll give him the best chance at keeping his graveyard full. He crushed the early rounds while I moved his reanimated balloons around a bit until they stayed in his range as much as possible. If you didn't know, his attacks get bonus damage the more balloons are in his graveyard, so you want this full at all times. This setup let him pop just about everything until ZMG started to come. Their outer layer was tanky enough that he wouldn't get through the green shell until his graveyard was basically empty. Then his weakened version would have to pop them down to nothing to start reanimating balloons. Round 87 was a great example of this, as he did a ton of damage at the start of the round, but slowed down once he was out of balloons. Then he weakly attacked until he was able to pop some super ceramics and refill part of his graveyard. This is always a weakness of his, but a supporting cast of monkeys easily gets around this. Without them though, I knew he'd struggle, and this caught up to him on round 97 as he stopped spawning balloons when the fortified ZMGs had about 50% of their health remaining. This made all of his attacks do very little damage, letting them swim through the map. And eventually some ceramics leaked before he could start spawning balloons again. Next we have the VTSG. I made this guy a 2-2-2-1 in the middle of the long map and hit play. This is by far the strongest tower we've tested so far, as he was popping the rounds almost as fast as possible. I mean, even the early hundreds barely made it on the screen. Before we knew it, we were at the fortified bed on round 140, and we popped it before the second bed of the round spawned, meaning it didn't even make it a quarter of a lap through the track. In fact, the first bloon to complete a lap was a DDT on round 192. Yes, it wasn't until 192 that a bloon made it around this oval. This was quickly one-upped by the second fortified bed on round 200 that made it 2 laps in, but that's not really a fair comparison. Still though, he was making our other towers look like they belong in BTD2, and he wasn't anywhere near stopping. He chugged along for quite some time, and the bloons didn't start to get far until the VTSG was in the mid 200s. Here, the fortified ZOMGs and DDTs were popped pretty quick, but the bads, specifically the fortified ones, were living long enough to make it over halfway through the track. This run took hours, even in super fast forward mode, and he kept beating the rounds. I was starting to believe in him making it to round 300, but it all came to an end on round 295. Here, the fortified bads were finally strong enough to leak. Onto the anti-bloon, the two-armed menace. We put him in almost the same exact spot as the VTSG and gave him a tech bot just below the Christmas tree, as it looks like a kid's toy. We set his arms to first and strong and watched him rip away. Before I knew it, he was on round 140, where he popped the bads about a quarter of the way through the map. Then he went on to fight the random bloons of the mid to late hundreds. Between his main attack and his ability though, he should do pretty well. Quickly, he was fighting rounds full of DDTs layered on top of colored blimps, but these speedy spiders were popped with a single ability. It does deal over 10,000 damage and has 2,000 pierce, so that counters the strat that the bloons have used time and time again to win. And he deals with the tanky bads by focusing them with his main attack and popping his ability every 30 seconds. I assumed a bad would eventually be the thing to take him out, as they just get stronger and faster with each round, but it was actually a DDT on round 174. His ability popped a couple times during this round, taking out most of the threats, but a few DDTs survived by being on the corners of the map each time, and they barely snuck out before his main attack could pop them, and his ability still had a little cooldown left. Next, we have the Legend of the Night. Just like the other super monkeys, he got off to a quick start, popping all of round 139 right as the Moabs got in his range, and followed that up by dealing with the fortified bad in about 4 laps. What's nice is that he attacks whatever is in first, and his batarangs bounce from bloon to bloon, getting more out of his pierce. And because he attacks so fast and has pretty high damage, he'd normally be shooting at the bads and pop everything else as they try to pass them. He was hauling through the rounds, and things didn't really get scary until the late hundreds. Here, the bloons were getting pretty fast, and it'd take him several laps to pop bads and DDTs, but we still had our secret weapon, his black hole. This automatically activates anytime you leak and prevents you from losing any lives for 8 seconds, so we could tank an entire bad if needed. The only thing is that it has a 3-minute cooldown and can only be used twice per round. Still, if something barely manages to get through, we'll be fine as he'll absorb it. This came into play on round 200, where we fought 2 fortified bads. Round and round they went, cruising through the map. They took quite a bit of damage as they were both covered in bandages as they swam into the black hole, but right as I was ready to start round 201, the black hole ended and the second bad leak. I was pretty surprised, but round 200 is a great score. Moving on, we have the Grandmaster Ninja. Because of his seeking attacks, we were able to place him in the same spot as the Legend of the Night. His 9 shurikens with 2 damage each were tearing apart the bloons. Not even fortified ceramics were making it past him. Now, this is pretty typical for a tier 5 monkey, but I wasn't sure how strong he'd be on his own. Normally, when I get a Grandmaster Ninja or Master Bomber, I buff them with 20 Shinobis, but in this video, they're by themselves, and he was doing alright. Moab started coming in the 50s, and he was still managing to pop them on the first pass. In fact, the first bloons that got past him were the ceramics in the last rush of round 55, but even they were popped before finishing a lap. Things picked up in the 60s as BFBs would always make him past him once, and round 63 got over a lap in. Still, nothing had made it that far until round 76. I tried a few times, but he could never pop the regrow ceramics fast enough. They'd always multiply and regenerate until there were too many to deal with. The Grand Saboteur is up, and he did even worse. We got him on round 41 and hit play. Instantly, the bloons were rushing through the map as he doesn't have the most popping power, but they were slowed down a bit by his ability. After several laps, he was eventually able to catch up and pop them all, but then round 42 took him out. This round has 6 regrow rainbows, and he was able to turn this into hundreds. It makes sense that he couldn't pop them all in time as he's a support monkey, but this is up there with the Moab Eliminator for the worst run of the day. For the final ninja, we have the Master Bomber, and we'll jump straight to round 76 as the ninja seemed to have a hard time with regrow bloons. Right away, he made a Regrow Farm too big to pop, and that that was even with the help of Ben's Trojan. I totally forgot to sell him here, but I remembered when we tried again. On the second attempt, I set him to last, and he slowly but surely worked his way through the round. My guess is because he gets a ton of extra damage to stun balloons, and when he would stun the ones in front, he couldn't follow up with shurikens as well because they'd be stacked on top of others. But when he targets the ones in back, they'd be stunned all by themselves. With this, he was able to move on, and we put him back on first. He made his way to the 90s, where his sticky bomb would pop blimps in a reasonable time, and he used his flash bombs and shurikens to clean up the ceramics. What's nice is that he easily had enough damage to pop the bat on round 100, as he broke the outer layer by the time it reached him, only a quarter of a lap in. But eventually he faced a round with too many balloons to handle, and for our master bomber, it was round 104. Shifting gears, we have Alchemists, and we'll start with the Perma Brew. This guy is one of the best support monkeys in the game, so it'll be interesting to see how he does when he has to do the popping. We got him on round 41, and he started chucking those potions. Either on the track or on the balloons, it didn't matter. These balloons did several laps, but eventually fell to that damage over time. He wasn't really at risk of leaking, but it was funny how far they got. But just like our Grand Saboteur, the Perma Brew wasn't able to pop the Regrow Rainbows on 42 in time, and they multiplied out of control. Next, we have the Total Transformation. When transformed, he'd pop the balloons the second they got in his range, but when he was in his base form, he was only slightly better than the Perma Brew. So we played this game of the balloons getting kinda far, and then he'd clear the screen whenever we used his ability. There were only a few rounds that I was scared of, like 76, but his ability popped the entire round in under one lap. He continued popping the rounds, even the large ceramic rushes of 78, but then the Regrow Rainbows came on round 79. There were too many to take out with one ability, and his base form would multiply them too much between cooldowns. But I figured I'd give this guy the same treatment as the PMFC, as his real power comes from transforming other monkeys. So his score is round 79, but I want to see what he can do if we give him 5 more Alchemists. I know it'd be way better with super buff druids or ninjas, but we have to have some boundaries. The tier 5 Alchemist gets to transform other elks. With these down, we hit play and took on round 79. His ability had a while before we could use it again, and the elks were making a pretty big farm. But once they all transformed, they caught up pretty quick and popped everything. Even the dreaded round 104 wasn't too hard for them. I suppose each mini monster's laser has 10 pierce and deals 2 damage, and when they're not transformed, they get the benefit of the main elk's unstable concoction. So it's no surprise they're doing well. They made it to round 119, where they took on the 3 bads. They popped the first 2 in about 4 laps, but the third made it much farther, with the DDTs inside making it about halfway through the map. This was because it was on the edge of the map outside of the elk's range when they transformed and attacking the other balloons, so it was still healthy when it was the last balloon standing, but they still had half the track to deal with. The 120s and 30s were pretty tough on this guy, as it would take more than one transformation to pop the tougher blimps, meaning the balloons were getting very far each round. And because unstable concoction doesn't scale with free play, its bonus damage was becoming less and less relevant, and eventually our alchemist couldn't keep up. Round 138 with all its DDTs got through. Even with them having transformed 4 different times this round, they didn't have the damage. Onto the Bloon Master Alchemist, or the BMA for short. I knew he'd struggle as he isn't really a balloon popper, but more of a free play support monkey. You see, he has a shrinking potion that reduces ZOMGs and below down to red balloons, but he doesn't throw it that often, and outside of this potion, he doesn't deal much damage. So he's used to make free play rounds easier for other monkeys. That being said, it was really fun watching this guy. Some balloons would be coated with his normal red attack, others would be glowing gold from his potion that makes them worth more when popped. He'd instantly turn leads into money, and of course, it was always nice seeing tough balloons like ceramics get turned into reds. But even the 40s were getting several laps in, no matter what balloons were sent his way. This was clearly a problem, and on round 49 it caught up to him. While popping the normal balloons, his main attack splashed some regrows, causing them to multiply, and by the time his shrinking potion was targeting them, it was too late. So round 49 is his score. Next, we have the Super Storm. Right off the bat, he was throwing super tornadoes and balls of lightning, keeping the balloons at the entrance. Even rounds like 97 and 98 didn't really make it past him. They'd mosey down the track, only to get blown back to the start once they got in his range. The bad though, that was a different story. You can't slow this guy down or push him back, so we just needed the Superstorm to do enough damage to pop this outer layer. It took a long time, but after about 2/3 of the map, he broke it down and pushed the insides back, eventually popping them down to nothing. Now, it's clear that bads are his weakness, but I wasn't sure how well he'd do against super dense packs of blimps, as they use tons of the Super Tornado's Pierce, but he was managing just fine. While he couldn't keep them all at the start, he was drastically slowing them down as a whole, giving him plenty of time to deal with the rounds. But eventually he made it to round 119. I was scared as these bads are stronger and faster than the last one he faced, but he actually popped these earlier along the track than the one on round 100. I assume this is because one was always in his range and the others would be hit by the projectiles as they went by, so they took much more damage per lap than when the bad was by itself. But beating these three let him move on to the 120s and 30s, where it was pretty much the same. He'd slow and damage the rounds until he popped enough to keep everything at the start. Then, after a couple minutes of constant attacking, he'd finish off the round. He even managed to beat round 138. It was funny to watch as I had no idea how far each DDT was, and there were so many that his super tornadoes would instantly disappear when he'd throw them. But after about 20 seconds of attacking, he beat this difficult round. What he couldn't beat though was the fortified bad. This thing was too tanky for him to pop, as it still had over half its health by the time it leaked. On to Bloons' favorite, the Spirit of the Forest. We put him in the middle of the straight map to get the most out of his thorns. The closest ones deal 30 damage to ceramics and blimps every half second, the medium thorns deal 15, and the farthest ones deal 10. And they have infinite pierce, so no matter how clogged the map gets with Bloons, we should be fine. At the start of the run, everything was getting popped in a half lap or less, and nothing did a full lap until ZOMGs started spawning. But where things got fun was in the hundreds. Here, the screen would fill with DDTs, BFBs, Moabs, and more, but they'd quickly be wiped out in groups. First, all the DDTs and Moabs would get popped down to nothing, then the BFBs would break apart into Moabs, and finally we'd be left with just ZOMGs, which would do a few laps but then get brought down to BFBs and eventually popped. It was weird but satisfying to see this happen over and over again. I thought we'd lose to either fortified ZOMGs or DDTs in the late 130s, but the Spirit of the Forest made it through to the fortified bad. We watched him go back and forth several times, and when he finally made it to the exit, he only had a few band-aids on him, so he still had over 50% of his health remaining. Next, we have the Avatar of Wrath. In the beginning, he kept the Bloons at the start of the track, but pretty quickly the Bloons were getting past him. They were never close to leaking, but it wasn't the dominant showcase that we were used to. But there are a couple reasons for this. The first is that he doesn't have 5 Poplas to back him up, giving him extra attack speed and pierce. And the other is that he deals more damage the more RBE is on screen, so he should scale a bit once blimps start coming. This seemed to be the case in around 79, as the Regrow Rainbows were able to tank and attack at the start of the round, but once BFB started appearing, he started one-shotting them. And in the 90s, he was able to pop ZOMGs quickly, but once he got down to the final few ceramics of a round, it'd take him a lap or two to take them out. This extra damage let him pop the bad in just one pass and clean up the insides a few laps later, but the early hundreds were too much for him. While there was a ton of RBE on screen, the Bloons managed to get through. That extra damage just wasn't enough to beat round 104. The Lord of the Abyss is next, and I had no idea what to expect. Right out the gate, he was killing it. Nothing was getting past him until the fortified BFBs of round 79, and even those he popped on the second pass. In fact, nothing was getting too far. Round 98 only made it 2 laps around, and the fortified ZOMGs of 107 only lasted 5 laps. And the rounds after that weren't too bad, but the 3 bads on 119 lived way too long. The bad layer themselves made it 12 or 13 laps around before breaking, and the insides completed a few more laps, easily being over the halfway point. It's clear the Lord of the Abyss can handle dense packs of Bloons, but single target damage is where he struggles. I guess this makes sense, as his tentacles do 50 damage each hit and can smack up to 80 Bloons at a time, and his trident doesn't do much in comparison. But this even let him beat round 138. It took a while, but he managed to take them all out, and the Moabs on 139 were a piece of cake. But then the fortified bad came on 140, and the Lord of the Abyss wasn't even close. He only had a couple band-aids on him, so he was only on his second stage of damage. Next, we have Poseidon. We put him in the middle of an enclosed ellipse and hit play. This way, his ability can bounce off the walls, getting the most out of each use, and he still has plenty of track for his main attacks. The funny thing is, I couldn't fit a village next to him, so we had to ultra boost the MIB 10 times for it to be able to reach our mermonkey. But we got it to work in the end. This guy was flying through the rounds. His main attacks were popping ZOMGs and DDTs in the hundreds very quick, and then his ability would come off cooldown and clear the screen. Before I knew it, he was on round 140. It took him about 5 laps to pop the outer layer of the fortified bad, and only another lap and a half to pop its children. This guy's damage was crazy, but as the rounds went on, he got more and more reliant on his ability. Each ice ball he shoots deals 30 damage, has 240 pierce, and can re-hit Bloons, so when the map is totally closed in like this, the ability does insane damage. But eventually, the Bloons got too tough. I thought it'd be a bad that would eventually take him down, like on round 167, but it was actually DDTs layered on top of BFBs. Poseidon made a huge dent in the wave with an ability, but before it could come back off cooldown, a DDT on round 168 got through. Onto the final harmonic. We put him in the middle of a long water map and let him run free. He wasn't doing the most damage, but between the extremely long map and the song that makes it even longer, he had plenty of time to pop everything. Even the ceramics on round 47 didn't last too long. But then round 49 came with its regrow rainbows. Everything was under control until they started multiplying, and the final harmonic didn't stand a chance. Moving on, we have support monkeys, starting with Super Mines, one of the most expensive upgrades in the game. And he has so much damage, we'll be starting on round 140. Just one pass through the mines put band-aids on the fortified bad and brought the normal one to below half health. This continued as the second pass brought the fortified one to about 50% and popped the normal bad to just ceramics. And it only took 2 more laps to finish off the round. These super mines kept chugging through the rounds, and pretty soon he was in the 170s where it was getting kind of crazy. He could still pop BFBs and Moabs in about a lap or two, but the screen would fill up with fortified ZMGs and not let him build up a wall of mines. I thought this would make it harder to deal with DDTs, but the explosions were big enough to still pop them all in a couple laps. What this did hurt though was our bad damage. The ZMGs would eat up all the mines, so bads would only get hit by a couple every time they were down bottom. This didn't stop him though, as he was still popping bads about a third of the way through the map, so there was nothing to worry about yet. And honestly, things never really got that scary. Even in the 190s, DDTs were still getting taken out in a few laps. BFBs and below were dealt with quickly, and bads and ZMGs only made it a little farther than before. I mean, we popped the 3 bads on 191 just over halfway through the map. But if normal bads are making it over halfway, you know that round 200 is going to be difficult with its 2 fortified ones. Here, our super mines could focus them way more than usual because there weren't any other Bloons on the track, but even with only having 2 targets, he couldn't pop them in time. The DDTs inside the second bad made it out. Next, we have the carpeted spikes. I put it in the same spot as the super mines so that the Bloons will have to run over his spikes going both ways. Right away, the map was covered in spikes, and our tech bot made the coating even thicker. The only round that made a dent was 63, but the ceramics only made it halfway to our factory. Other than ceramic rushes, we didn't see much until 79, where their constant stream of rainbows actually made a path for the BFBs. It was short-lived, but cool to see. But this let us know that Moabs won't be the problem. It'll be dealing with the ceramics inside. This makes sense as it gets extra damage to blimps, but doesn't have nearly enough pierce to handle dense packs of balloons. Still though, he was able to keep up with rounds like 104 that has taken out several other monkeys. Each spew of spikes took out tons of blimps and whittled down the ceramics inside. I have no idea how far they got, but I bet splitting up the rounds helped a ton. You see, he popped the Moabs and BFBs in waves instead of all at once, which let him handle the ceramics while the blimps were slowly swimming through the map. If he'd broken them all down to ceramics right away, I bet they would have been too fast to deal with. Anyway, he kept doing this, splitting up the rounds and keeping a ton of the ceramics inside slow Bloons like ZOMGs. But eventually, he hit a round that was too much, and for him, it was 124. The BFBs had too many Bloons inside, and unlike ZOMGs, they move at a decent speed and break down to Moabs quickly. So he didn't sell the round well at all. Onto the perma spike. I put him on the longest map and hit play. For the first 40-ish rounds, nothing was getting close to breaking through his wall. Just like in a normal chimps game, he was able to place more spikes per round than were being used, so we had this nice feeling of safety. That changed in the 80s though, as round 81 got through with its 17 BFBs. He popped almost all of them with his built-up wall, but a little over 3 got through. He had plenty of time to place enough spikes to pop the rest of the round the next lap, but his massive stockpile was gone, and we won't get it back for the rest of the run. From here on out, almost every single round completed at least 1 lap, bringing his spike reserves down to 0. The only round that didn't was 90, which makes sense as it has under 3,000 RBE, while every other round in this range has 20k or more. But in the low 90s, the Bloons started completing laps. The ZMGs on round 94 made it around 8 times before the spikes could pop them all, and round 95 made it to the exit. It looked like the Moabs ate all the spikes, letting the DDTs sprint through before this factory could catch up. Moving on, we have the primary expertise. I put him at the end of the long straightaway to get the most out of his ballista. It was one-shotting every Bloon it touched, even fortified ceramics in the 90s. Blimps were slightly different though. It still chunked them down with each hit, but it didn't have the pierce to hurt them all with each attack, and it doesn't fire that fast. This let rounds like 98 get several laps in, but once everything was down to Moabs or ceramics, the pecs caught up quickly. What was nice was that he dealt with the 3 bads on 119 pretty well. He had plenty of pierce to hit all 3, so that 190 damage per attack added up. This let the Pex pop the outer layers in just 6 laps, and he had plenty of time to pop the children inside. But the 120s are a different animal. Round 125 came with its 939,000 RBE, and the primary expertise didn't stand a chance. He didn't even manage to break all the ZOMGs down to BFBs by the time something leaked. But that's the only village that does damage, so the other 2 in the Homeland Defense and Monkeyopolis get scores of 0, along with the 3 banana farms. So next is the Sentry Champion. I had to find the balance of getting the most out of his Pierce and the explosions from the sentries timing out, so I put him in the middle of the longest map. And with this, he speed ran to the hundreds. Here, the Bloons were getting several laps in, but all the projectiles and explosions would let him catch up and beat the rounds. Overall, he's very well rounded, as he isn't weak to hordes of Bloons or strong tanky blimps. I mean, he even popped the first bad on round 119 on the 3rd lap and finished off the round a few laps later, which is way better than I was expecting from this guy. And while he didn't do it exceptionally fast, he handled the 75 fortified BFBs of 124 just fine. Nothing was close to leaking, it just wasn't as impressive as when he popped the bads. I will say though, he didn't do the best versus DDTs. Anytime we saw them, they made it pretty far, and this is eventually what took him out on round 138. Right as he was starting to clear out the map, a DDT got through. The Ultra Boost engineer is next, and we'll be crosspathing him with sentry guns to increase his DPS. Normally, he's a support monkey, but today he'll be doing the damage. I put him in the same spot as the Sentry Champion, and had him start Ultra Boosting himself whenever possible. This way, he'll attack faster and place more sentries down. Even with this though, he was already struggling against the 40s, as a few rounds made it several laps around the track before getting popped. He continued on into the 50s and 60s, where he took on Moabs and BFBs, both of which made it pretty far, especially since it'd take him a lap or 2 to clean up the ceramics inside. Luckily, his cleansing foam removes properties like regrow, so he didn't lose to around 76 or 79. But even before super ceramics respawning, these BFBs were getting super far, and that's what did him in. Round 82 with its 10 BFBs and 5 fortified ones. He did manage to break everything down to just ceramics and pop most of them by the time they leaked, but he just barely ran out of time. I was honestly surprised he made it this far, as I didn't expect him to pop the ZOMG on round 80. But 82 is his score. Next, we have the XXXL trap. I put him in the middle of the straight line map so that Bloons could be trapped going either direction, and made him a 205. This will let him place traps more often and give him some more single target damage for the bads. For the first several rounds, everything was getting trapped. The only thing was I forgot to move my mouse over there to collect the trap right away, so some Bloons would get through while it waited to be collected. Once it was gone though, the NG placed a trap right away and caught back up. I saw this and moved my mouse over there for round 82, and his performance drastically improved, as he could now keep up with the Bloons by placing more traps. The rounds went by and he was one-shotting everything, making us some extra money along the way. My personal favorite round to watch was 94, as it was perfectly timed to show off his skills, but round 95 was nice too. There's something special about him almost keeping up with the DDTs on that round that has ended so many of my chimps runs. But eventually, he ran into the bad on round 100 and wasn't even close to popping it. On to our final monkey, we have the Beast Handler, starting with the Megalodon. Now I know we've been doing each tier 5 on their own, but the Beast Handlers require others to be able to control their tier 5s. So we'll be maxing out the power of each one. It's still one beast, just 7 different handlers. We put the Meg in the middle of the long map and watched it rip the balloons apart. Anything that got in its range would be dragged into the water, and it'd pop all the balloons near it with its thrashing. This continued for a long time. I mean, it even held round 118 to the first lap, as it one-shot all the DDTs and ZOMGs, and round 119 did even worse. The moment a bad got in his range, he dragged them in, so the Meg didn't even have to deal with the children inside. I wasn't sure how long this one-shotting would last, but I figured it had to end soon. But it just kept happening. Even the fortified bad on 140 was pulled into the depths, though this was easily the slowest one so far. Fast forward 30 rounds and we finally met a blimp that could resist the Meg's pull. The bad on round 170 was the first Bloon not to get one shot. I'm not sure how the damage works compared to dragging it in, but it took 13 separate bites from the Meg to pop him. And from here on out, all of the bads had to be popped this way instead of being one shot. Everything else was super easy though. They would either pass the bads and get insta-killed, or just get popped by the Meg's thrashing while he was latched onto a bad. He cruised through the rest of the hundreds, making his way to the fortified bads, and even without being able to one-shot them, he took them both out a little over halfway through the map. But eventually, the Bloons were too much, and for this tier 5 beast, it was round 215. All of the normal blimps were a piece of cake, but these 6 bads were pretty tough, especially with one of them being fortified, and this beefy one made it through in the end. Next, we have the Giganotosaurus. He started chomping through the rounds, even dealing with round 104 in just a few bites. I was unfamiliar with this guy's game, so I was blown away. Looking farther into it, the Giganotosaurus has a crazy 150 pierce, 1,550 damage, an additional 516 damage to stun Bloons, and he bites every 0.9 seconds. Plus, he has a global stomp that deals 950 damage every 15.5 seconds. So it's no wonder why he's crushing these Bloons. Round 139 literally did not complete a single lap, and he popped all of 140 before they made it halfway. This domination continued for quite some time and didn't really slow down until the 180s. Here, ZOMGs would actually live a few laps, and the Moabs inside were fast enough to sneak an extra lap in from time to time. Still though, he continued on. These stomps and bites seem to be extra effective versus DDTs, probably because they're so fast that stunning them is super useful, and they don't have the most health to be able to tank his chomps. But eventually, something got through, and it was the final bad on round 193. And for our final monkey, we have the Paukai. This feathered beast can pick up ZOMGs and below and do solid damage in the process. He easily made it to the hundreds, and even here he was stalling some of the rounds at the very start until they were popped down to nothing, like rounds 136 and 37, who didn't even complete a single lap, even though they took a little bit to pop. Round 140 came, and I thought he'd be a goner. But somehow, someway, this giant bird managed to pop the bads on this round. And honestly, it was pretty easy for him, only letting them get about a fourth of the way through the map. He continued on, beating tougher and tougher Bloons, making his way to the 170s, where each round took a couple minutes to complete. The nice thing is that the only difficult Bloons for him were DDTs and bads. The prior just because they were getting so fast, and the bads because they couldn't be flown back to the start. One funny thing is that we had to pick this map over the oval because DDTs were too fast for the Paukai to catch on the other map, causing him to lose in the 140s, but on this map they run back into him. This was amazing, but eventually he had to lose. And for the Paukai, it was round 178 that did him in. A bad managed to leak just before breaking down to ZOMGs and DDTs. It was fun to watch though, as he just attacked the bad the entire time, only damaging other Bloons if they overlapped with it. And if anything passed the bad, the bird would fly it back to the start, buying way more time for itself. I put each hero on their own perfect map, and we're going to see how far they can get. We started with Quincy and got him to max level on round 50. Here, he was popping everything right as they got in range, and his abilities made it even faster. It wasn't until the ceramic rushes on round 55 that something made it past him, but he cleaned them up before the Bloons finished a single lap. So they didn't even make it 5% of the way to the exit. The nice thing about this map, other than the length, is that the Bloons overlap each other no matter what lap or direction they're going. This way, we can get the most out of Quincy's Pierce and abilities with each attack. This let him take on rounds that are usually way too hard for him, like round 95. Here, he was able to keep up with the DDTs until Rapid Shot wore off, but even without his abilities, he popped them pretty quick once they were stacked on top of each other. Normally, he struggles with DDTs, but because of the map and the MIB, he was able to pop them with plenty of track left to spare. Fast forward to the early hundreds, and he was still doing fine, popping the normal ZOMG layers on 111 in just 2 laps and the fortified ones shortly after. This makes sense as Quincy gets plenty of bonus damage to blimps, shoots 3 arrows at a time, and attacks 5 times per second. Not to mention that his rapid shot 4x's his attack speed and how effective Storm of Arrows is at nuking Moabs. The only unfortunate thing about him is how slowly he cleans up these super ceramics inside. It doesn't take that long, but it is scary with how fast they move this late into the game. What's nice though, is how fast he pops bads. On round 119, he popped the outer layer of the first 2 in just 3 laps, giving him more than enough time to clean up the insides. In fact, he did this and still had over half the track left to work with. But Bloons get faster and stronger with each round, so the endless march of blimps got farther and farther until they leaked. And for Quincy, it was round 138 that did him in, with its 126 DDTs. He could take out small packs of DDTs before this, but when the screen was jam-packed with them, he didn't have the Pierce to damage them all in time. So round 138 is Quincy's limit. Next up, we have Gwen. She makes sense to put on the straight line map as her attacks don't seek, and we want the Bloons to pass over her walls of fire as much as possible. We got her to level 20 in the 50s and watched her melt everything. Nothing could stand up to her flamethrower. Even in the 90s, things were popping fast. Her main attack was doing way more than I expected, ZOMGs were broken down in a lap or 2, BFBs and Moabs melted quickly, DDTs weren't an issue, and when the screen was full of Bloons, Gwen didn't flinch. Her 2 abilities are amazing at taking out huge hordes of Bloons, so this wasn't a problem. And before we knew it, Gwen was facing the bad. This was by far the slowest she'd popped a Bloon all day, as it took almost 4 laps for Gwen to pop the outer layer. As usual, the insides were cleaned up pretty quick, but now we know that bads are Gwen's weakness. The early hundreds that follow are full of odd combinations of huge rushes of balloons and weird amounts of blimps. I feel like the game just throws each type at you and hopes you're weak to one of them. My favorite of which is 104, where you face hundreds of leads, ceramics, purples, and Moabs with 39 BFBs layered on top. This round ends basically any run that's low on Pierce, but like we said earlier, that's not Gwen, so she beat this round pretty quick. In fact, she kind of cruised to 119 where some bads challenged her to a rematch. Faster, stronger, and in a group of 3, the purple whales swam through the track. They made it about twice as far as the round 100 one as they got to laps 7, 8, and 9 before the purple layers were popped. And the insides made it a couple laps farther, almost getting to the halfway point on this long map. But Gwen continued on, taking on tough rounds like 135. How she's still able to pop fortified DDTs in time and can crack down on fortified ZOMGs in the same round is wild, but at this point, the Bloons were getting pretty far. Round 138 scared me a bit as the map was full of DDTs for quite some time, but as fast as they came, they disappeared. But then it was time for the fortified bad, and Gwen just didn't have the damage. She was not on pace to pop this tanky Bloon, but what actually leaked first was a DDT inside the normal bad behind it. So Gwen is in first with a score of 140. Next up we have Sai, the Psychic Child. They were a bit harder to get to level 20, but we got there on round 59. Here, Sai was deleting everything as they entered the screen. I knew Sai's DPS got pretty crazy once they can one-shot ZMGs, but I forgot how well they can keep up with dense packs of balloons. This pattern continued until the late 80s, where enough blimps were finally sent that they'd make it a lap or 2 in. The nice thing about Sai though is that their level 20 Scream wipes the screen anytime it's used. Plus, we gotta put Sai in the middle of a skinny oval, meaning their stun can affect an obnoxious amount of balloons once they start getting far. This started to be useful in the 90s, where it bought some time for Psionic Scream to come off cooldown, like on round 95 where the stun slowed the DDTs long enough for Scream to come back. And since no bad spawn yet, we knew Sai would one-shot every round. But it was only a matter of time until we made it to round 100 and the bad swam through the map completely unfazed. While Sai put on an absolute show from round 60 through 99, this is the earliest loss of the day. Moving on, we have Geraldo, and unlike the other heroes, the early rounds do matter because we can place turrets during this time. So, while I farmed the money to level him up, we placed a turret down anytime he was close to maxing out his stock on them. While not as good as the upgraded turrets, these will be nice to put spicy potions on in the future as we can pickle them without any downside. The first thing I rushed was getting Jerry to level 13 for his upgraded turrets, as they'll be most of his damage later on. Once we unlocked these though, we didn't need to rush anything else. We just placed a turret down anytime they came in stock. I made sure to place them in the middle of the screen as close to the track as possible. This is where they'll perform best and is why I chose this map. The track forces the balloons to overlap with each other no matter what direction they're going, meaning the turrets will get more out of their peers compared to other maps. After we had some upgraded turrets down, we started buying his pet rabbits, the fourth of which we purchased on round 45. This is a super early bunny and it'll easily give us more than enough damage to go back to farming. Here, we got more money than we need for the rest of the game, sold our farms, and focused on Geraldo. I kept placing his turrets and we got ready for his level 20 restock. This happened on round 77 where we got to place 4 more turrets down. But now our plan was simple. Line the map with turrets whenever they're up and keep a camo potion on Geraldo at all times. This way everything gets a range boost and extra damage to camo balloons. And this let us coast through the rest of the normal game and even pop all of round 100 in just over 2 laps. I thought this round and the early hundreds might be tough, but no other items were needed. The turrets and bunny had enough damage and pierce to take out both the bad and the hyper dense rounds that follow. In fact, the next time I used an item was round 119 where I placed down a genie. Geraldo could have beaten this round as is, but there's no real reason not to speed things up, especially since he hadn't struggled yet. And if you're wondering why I'm not placing his nails at the back of the track, BFBs and Larcher are able to hit them when making the turn in the bottom right, so we can't build a wall back there. That being said, I don't think it's worth playing on a shorter map with Rune for these, as when we leak, it'll likely be a huge number of balloons that get through, much too big for a wall of these mines. Anyway, Geraldo plowed through the rounds. Even 137 didn't stand a chance against him and his army of turrets. And it helps that the bunny's damage scales with RBE on screen, similar to the Avatar of Wrath. With this setup, we didn't need glues, traps, or genies to make it to the fortified bad. For this round though, I did slap down 2 genies. It was a bit overkill, but we managed to pop the outer layer just 4 laps in and cleaned up the inside shortly after. Things were looking good. We could handle huge groups of Bloons, our single target damage wasn't bad, and we had plenty of items in the shop to bail us out. But we needed this help sooner than I thought we would. Round 146 had an absurd number of BFBs and DDTs, some of which made it to the exit. So we bought a continue and tried again. This time with a genie, some fire spirits, pickles, sharpening stones, and blade traps. And still, some DDTs made it super far. It's tough to take them out when they're layered on top of BFBs, but with all these items, we made it through. The leftovers let us crush 147, but once the genie wore off, things got a bit scarier. We still had the spicy potions and pickles, but some of the DDTs were getting far on 148. To help with this, we put down 2 creepy idols to slow their progress. These idols have a chance to push back Bloons and stun blimps every time they pass through their range, and because this map loops back and forth so much, the idols are very effective. These lasted until around 150, where I tried to get by without them. I was hoping we'd get an easy round or just match up better against what sent our way, but that was not the case, and several DDTs got through, causing us to try again. We used 2 more totems and placed another spicy potion. This was just enough to pop the DDTs before leaking and let Geraldo focus on the 3 bads sent this round for quite some time. I don't know exactly how far everything got, but I know it was close. But from here on out, we were just scraping by. The creepy idols kept us safe for a bit, but once they expired on 152, we were in trouble. Anytime a turret, spicy potion, or jar of pickles came in stock, we bought them, and we watched his shop for anything else that could help. We rotated through every option, but eventually it wasn't enough. And for Geraldo, it was round 157. Even with us using his entire shop, including a genie, the Bloons managed to get through. But he did manage to pass Gwen for first place. Next up, we have ETN. We put him on the straight line map so that his dragons could max out their pierce more often, and the UCAV would get more out of its explosions once the Bloons started overlapping with each other. This is down the road a bit though, as we got him to level 20 in the 50s, and his permanent UCAV kept the Bloons at the entrance, leaving very little for our dragons to do except aimlessly fly around ETN and the MIB. This didn't last forever though. In the 60s, Bloons actually started making it to ETN so his 8 friends could help out. While included, we didn't really feel their impact until the early hundreds, where there were enough Bloons to start completing laps around the track, and they were dense enough to max out the pierce of every attack. While scary that there are more Bloons on screen than we can damage, it's nice to know that we're basically maxing out ETN's DPS for just about every round. Something I was surprised to see was how well ETN was at dealing with tanky Bloons like fortified ZOMGs. He isn't known for his damage, yet on round 116 he cracked their outer layers super fast once he started focusing them. And this held true for bads as well. On round 119, ETN popped the outer layer of the first bad in just over 4 laps and dealt decent damage to the other 2 in the process. Overall, the round made it about halfway through the map, but was still much better than I was expecting. I suppose the insanely long map helps a ton when his UCAV is global and the dragons can see most of the track. With this round getting over halfway through though, I was scared of the fortified bad on 140. I thought we were going to get there, as he even handled the tanky ZOMGs on 137 just fine, but then his true weakness showed itself. DDTs. Round 138 flooded the screen with these fast blimps, and some got through before even showing signs of thinning out, so ETN wasn't even close. Still, a score of 138 ties him with Quincy for 3rd overall so far. On to Benjamin, one of the best heroes in the game. I got him down on round 41, used his abilities, and watched him Trojan tons of Bloons. But even with all this effort, every Bloon leaked and caused him to lose, putting him firmly in last place. To be fair, I didn't give him a MIB, so who knows how far he would have gotten. Next, we have Adora. She's an interesting one because we need to farm way more than other heroes if we're going to keep her sacrifices up constantly. So we focused way more on making money in the early game, and we'll be keeping some farms the entire run. Fortunately, it was super easy to level her up to 20 with her sacrifice ability, so we got there in the early 50s. Here, her main attack could solo the rounds, but we were using her level 10 ability to speed things up from time to time. The nice thing about this map is her Ball of Light is almost guaranteed to use all of its pierce in the later rounds, and Adora has enough range to see the entire track when her abilities are active. This, combined with her solid popping power, let her cruise through the early hundreds without me even using blood sacrifice. Things were starting to make it a few laps in, but even the fortified ZOMGs on 108 weren't a threat to leaking. The only reason I started sacrificing on around 114 was because I didn't want to lose out of nowhere. But my game plan was simple: place a few more farms and sacrifice them whenever Adora's buff wears off. Were the farms I picked up a bit overkill? Yes. but they were easy to make and we had $1.7 million saved up. But this brought us to round 119 and the 3 bads. I thought single target damage would be her weakness, but with such a long map, she was able to break them down in just a few laps. And after, she got to go back to her bread and butter of destroying waves jam-packed with balloons. No round was an issue for her. I mean, the 120s and early 30s were a joke. Round 138 though, that was a different story. The map quickly filled with DDTs and stayed for a long time. We slowed down the round to make sure we kept her blood sacrifice buff active, and eventually Adora popped them all. I don't know how far they got, but they had to be close to leaking. And this is where we could tell the balloons were getting tanky. The Moabs on 139 lasted way longer than I thought they would. I know there are 253 of them, but still, I was starting to worry they'd leak. But then the fortified bad came on round 140. I didn't have high hopes, but I made sure to keep her sacrifice buff up. And to my surprise, she popped that outer layer in 6.5 laps. The insides made it about halfway through the map, but that's way better than I was expecting. And the normal bad wasn't hard to pop after. The only thing was how many sacrifices I had to do while Adora was popping these purple whales. While not an issue for me, it did cost a ton of money. And over the next few rounds, we started bleeding cash. Each wave would end with a bad or two, taking many sacrifices to deal with. So we switched over to eating a slightly cheaper farm while keeping some central markets around for extra cash. We were still losing money, but I couldn't complain because of how well Adora was doing. DDTs were usually popped pretty quick, and she had the Pierce to deal with large rushes of ZOMGs and BFBs, or so I thought. This whole run, I assumed a bad would take us out, but on round 149, it was something different. The screen filled with DDTs layered on top of ZOMGs, BFBs, and Moabs. Adora popped a few of them before they got out, but she just didn't have the Pierce to damage them all in time. But still, a score of 149 is pretty good. Next, we have Sada. I knew the straight map would be great for her main attack and Sword Leap, but I didn't know how good it would be for her level 10 ability. I used Sword Charge for the first time on round 42, and she ran back and forth along this map so many times, one-shotting the balloons in the process. The only thing that would have made it better is if she could use her level 3 ability during it. But this destroyed the rounds as her Sword Charge can re-hit balloons if the track overlaps, and that's kind of the whole point of this map. We would sometimes run into funny situations where a balloon's hitbox was too small and would go a couple laps before getting hit by Sada, like on rounds 61 and 62. This worries me a bit for the future rounds when ceramics get faster, but in free play, blimps are our biggest threat and their hitbox is much bigger to where this won't be a problem. And we know she's not maxing out her abilities Pierce because that ends Sword Charge instantly, but this made for an odd experience. Instead of watching our hero attack the balloons like normal, Sada just ran back and forth the entire time, kind of like she was a balloon. She had to be a balloon to beat the balloons. Fortunately, this essentially turned her into a global hero, not limited to her tiny attack range like normal, and this let her crush the rounds. 104, the round that ended so many of our tier 5 runs, popped like it was nothing. I mean, it took Sada under 30 seconds to beat rounds 104 through 107. I do have the faster forward mod on, but still, that's so much faster than the other heroes. Nothing was a problem, and before I knew it, we were on round 140. I made sure to spam Sword Leap between charges for that extra 540 damage, and watched her whittle these 2 bads down. What's nice is no matter what's on screen, she damages everything with her charges. So even if we're against layered balloons or a bad isn't in first, she should be fine. We saw this as she popped the normal bad well before the fortified one, even though it comes out second. But she beat this round with the balloons only getting about halfway through the map. But now, the round started to take a while. Sada would handle the layered balloons even if it was DDTs hidden behind bigger blimps, and then spend a while popping a bad or two. This wasn't a problem until round 160, where the whales were just too fast and tanky. They made it most of the way through the map, and the layers beneath took too long to pop. But the worst part was the ceramics leaked because of a Sword Charge missing on the last couple laps. But even with a Sword Leap, a few made it to the exit. But this put Sada on first with a score of 160. On to Brickle. I put her in the middle of a skinny oval since her pistol does single target damage and her Megamind explosions are big enough to damage everything. Plus, this makes her mini sea mines able to always be useful. We got her to level 20 in the mid 50s and the balloons didn't stand a chance. Her pistol was one-shotting everything, the sea mines were dealing 22 damage each, and her Megamind was popping the Moabs even though it was completely unnecessary. Surprisingly though, this fell off pretty quick. In the 80s, Brickle's Megamind and pistol would pop the blimp players fast, especially if naval tactics was active, but the swarms of super ceramics were tough for her to deal with. They now take more than one shot to pop, especially when fortified, so they would get kind of far when there's a bunch of them, like on round 84. The nice thing was her Megamind and naval tactics could catch her up quick if needed, but in the 90s, the rounds just got bigger and bigger. Eventually, they got to the point where Megamind stopped bailing her out as it only has 150 Pierce. It would still pop a ton of blimps with each explosion, but the ceramics would run amok for several laps. We got a short break from this on round 100 as we popped the Bad's outer layer only a quarter of a lap in, but the early hundreds went right back to overwhelming her. And on round 103, the Bloons got through. Brickle did manage to break all the ZOMGs down to ceramics, but couldn't clean them all up in time, so she did just barely better than Psy. Shifting gears, we have Ezili, who we maxed out on round 57. Instantly, she was one-shotting the Bloons, but not in the traditional way. No, it was one attack, and her damage over time ticks would bring them down to nothing. It was actually pretty satisfying to watch, similar to a Bloon solver. One thing we had to do though was keep a few central markets down bottom to build up some lives. You see, we were spamming her sacrificial totem to give Ezili more range, pierce, and attack speed, and this eats 1 life per use, which can add up once the rounds get long. Outside of this, Ezili had a few nice perks. We didn't have to worry about regrows because of her grow blocker, and blimps were a non-factor because of her Moab Hex one-shotting them and her main attack dealing tons of damage to Moab class Bloons. This let her easily coast to the hundreds where she had to take on some huge swarms. The hardest part for her was when there were tons of Moabs as her Hex couldn't pop them all, and super ceramics would come pouring out. She would pop them with plenty of track left, but ZOMGs and Bads were much easier for her as she can skip the insides, like on round 119 where she used 3 hexes to pop the Bads before they finished a single lap. But as the rounds went on, the Bloons got farther and farther, especially if the round was full of DDTs or weaker blimps like BFBs and Moabs, as Hex can only jump to so many blimps before ending. A good showing of this was round 133, where some of the ceramics inside the BFBs got so far before being popped, but the ZOMGs afterwards were super easy to deal with. But as you might have guessed, it was the crazy number of DDTs on round 138 that did her in. She got a 4 hexes before leaking, and they were starting to thin out, but a few DDTs made it out in time. So 138 is her score. Moving on, we have Churchill, and this guy's damage is so high that we're going to skip straight to the hundreds, where even here he was making the game look easy. Round 105 only made it 1 lap in before it was over, and the following laps didn't do much better. This makes sense, as each shell Churchill shoots can explode up to 7 times, and each explosion has 20 pierce and 20 damage. Not to mention his machine gun and abilities that bring his DPS even higher. He kept on dumpstering the rounds like it was his day job, which I guess it is, but still, he even did fine against the 126 DDTs on round 138. It was basically impossible to count how far they got, but based on the time it took him to pop the round, the DDTs were roughly 16 laps in, so about 2/3 of the way through the track. The round after this was much easier for him, but we could see Churchill getting pierce capped by the Moabs as his shells weren't shooting through to the other side. This is nice in that we're maxing out his DPS, but scary that he's hitting his limit. But now we have to take on the fortified Bad. Usually, a max level Churchill is amazing at taking out Bads because his Moab barrage does 8,000 damage to them per use, but this fortified guy comes in at 200,000 health, much more than we'd see in a normal game of chimps. But even with this crazy HP, Churchill popped the outer layer in just 6 laps and handled the insides before they made it halfway through the map. The rest of the 140s weren't too bad. The rounds would normally start off with Churchill breaking all the DDTs and Moabs, then whittling down the massive numbers of fortified ZOMGs. And by the time those were taken care of, Moab Barrage would break the Bads open, leaving just some simple cleanup. The only annoying thing was Churchill must have a memory leak or something because my game was running so much slower than any other hero. But if I exited to home and loaded back in, it'd be better for a couple rounds. Honestly, not a big deal, just an odd bug. But this balloon popping pattern continued for the rest of the game. Round 172 opened with a bunch of DDTs that he popped first, followed closely by a massive rush of BFBs. And while we were handling the last of them, Moab Barrage busted open the ZOMGs for Churchill to pop next. And once he cleared them up, Churchill focused on the Bads until they were no more. I didn't know when this was going to end, as he even popped the fortified DDTs on 173 right away, but surprisingly, the rest of the round was too much. He just didn't have the pierce to keep up with all the blimps sent his way. But still, a score of 173 easily puts him in first place. On to Rosalia. I had no idea what to expect. I just knew we needed a long map for her to fly around on and set it up so her lasers would shoot straight down the track. I do wish more heroes performed better on other maps, but it makes sense why the straight line is so good for most of them. Anyway, we got her to level 20 in the 60s, and she was just spawn camping the Bloons with her jetpack ability, and she had a kinetic charge ready and waiting for blimps to spawn. It really wasn't fair until the 90s, where her Pierce started to be an issue. On round 98, her laser broke down the first few blimps, but couldn't damage much more than that. She did this fast, as each laser deals 60 damage to Moab class Bloons, but only has 10 Pierce. Because of this, she was pretty reliant on her abilities to damage larger groups of Bloons. Luckily, kinetic charge and scatter missile were both killing it on this map because of how grouped up everything got. Round 111 showed this perfectly. Her main attack could break open ZOMGs and BFBs, but kinetic charge was hard carrying. Every time she used it, the explosion did a minimum 4,000 damage to every Bloon nearby. The only thing that would have made it better is if we could charge it up more effectively. But this helped us keep up with the rounds, and Scatter Missile and her main attack could clean up the fast, weaker Bloons leading the charge. In the moment, I didn't realize how much kinetic charge was doing, so I was worried about the 3 bads on 119. But she said,
"You can't run from me."
Hunted each one of them down, popping one every couple laps. If she could have popped them all at once, it would have been a masterclass, but I can't complain with how well she did. Rosalia's level 10 ability carried her until she hit a round it couldn't deal with. And just like many other heroes, it was 138. The DDTs quickly filled the map, only letting her get 2 kinetic charges off this round. And while her main attacks did pop quite a few of them, some DDTs managed to get through in the end. But with this, she tied Ezili, Quincy, and Etienne with a score of 138. Next, we have Pat Fusty. He hit level 20 in the 50s, and not much made it past him. He was either one-shotting the Bloons or pushing Moabs back towards the entrance until they broke down to ceramics. This continued for a while, but once BFBs and ZOMG started coming, they got past him. He can only slow these guys down, not push them back like he can to smaller Bloons. It was fun to watch rounds like 86 though, where he would stall the Moabs in one place once he broke through that tougher BFB layer. He wasn't the fastest at breaking through these though. This makes sense as he's more of a support hero in that he buys your monkeys time and gives them extra damage with his roar, but we could really feel this lack of popping power in the 90s. Round 95 filled the screen with DDTs and Moabs long enough that I was scared they were going to leak, and round 96 just walked right past Pat until he popped them down to the pufferfish level. This only took a couple laps with the BFBs, but the ZOMGs took a while. So clearly the tough Bloons are his biggest problem. Literally. This didn't give me the most hope for round 100, but by constantly roaring, he was able to pop the outer layer just over halfway through the map, and pick off the children before they leap. Now, I could have hugged the ZOMGs, but I'm going to be honest. I forgot he can hug more than one at a time at level 20, and I didn't want to offset them and maybe have some ceramic sprint for the exit while telling him to hug the second one. Knowing this would have been helpful for the early hundreds, like 103 where the round ends with 10 fortified ZOMGs. Hugging them to BFBs definitely would have been the play. Oh well, he managed to get by anyway. It was just harder and took longer. What did beat him though was round 106 with its 93 DDTs, over 3 times as many as what came on round 95, and 27 of them were fortified. But with this score, he was able to beat Brickle and Psy by a few rounds. Next, we have the hardest hero to do this with, Corvus. We got him to max level in the 50s, and his spirit was one-shotting everything to the point where I didn't need to cast any spells. I forgot how strong his base spirit gets at the end, probably because I'm usually so focused on using spells that I don't think about it. But I didn't really start clicking buttons until round 96, where I toggled on aggression and had to use Soul Harvest and Dark Ritual to keep up his mana pool. This was pretty easy to do until round 100, where there was only one Bloon to siphon mana from. The bad. Luckily, it only made it 2.5 laps in before popping. Even at this point though, the run had lasted long enough that Soul Harvest got disabled, so it would have been very difficult to keep his mana up for much longer. But with this, we were in the early hundreds, and luckily for us, the more Bloons there are on screen, the easier it is to get mana for Corvus. So I just spam spells like Aggression, Echo, Ember, Frostbound Spear, and Storm, and whenever he'd get low, I'd Dark Ritual the Horde and instantly cap him out. There was no real rhyme or reason to it. I just went in with the thought that the more spells the better, and all of them work super well on a map like this where the Bloons overlap with each other constantly. We managed to beat all sorts of rounds, those with tons of DDTs, some with just a few fortified ZOMGs, and everything in between. But on round 111, I figured it was time to start breaking out the big guns, Ancestral Might. I used one Echo Might combo and saw the potential. In just one use, it broke down several ZOMGs, which was perfect because these faster BFBs separated from the pack, making them easier to see and deal with. And once we had enough mana, I used Echo Trample to clean up the front of the track. This is similar to Sada in that the spirit runs back and forth over the Bloons, dealing tons and tons of damage. With this and a few more spells, we were able to beat the round. I kept spamming spells and trying out new combos on future rounds, and I started to get scared. I couldn't tell if some were slightly better than others, and what if I just barely lose when a win is possible? Oh well, if a skill issue does happen, I'll just have to hope that some of you guys can beat my score. Anyway, our experimenting brought us to round 119. We started off strong with Storm and Aggression, but we quickly ran out of mana. I used Corvus's abilities whenever they were in range, but once Soul Harvest got disabled, it was kind of over. I even Spirit Walked Corvus around to get more out of Dark Ritual, but he wasn't able to get everything. The DDTs inside the final bad got through. But a score of 119 puts him in the middle of the pack. For our second to last hero, we have Striker Jones. This guy revolves around explosions, so we had to put him on a map with the most overlap. Here, his attacks were alright, but what was impressive was his concussive shell. We were spamming that in the 50s, and whatever it hit basically couldn't move. Even the BFB on 60 was inching through the map, and this was on 10 times speed instead of the normal 3 times. Soon though, we could tell that damage would be his problem, not pierce or attack speed or something else like that. The moment Super Ceramic started coming around 82, we got a glimpse into the future. Striker was able to stun the BFBs until they were just Moabs, and then they'd start to haul through the map. If they weren't being stunned, Super Ceramics could make it an extra lap or two. The nice thing though was he could pop them and damage blimps farther back because of the explosion's pierce. So even when he focused Ceramics, Striker was not neglecting the Moab class balloons. This only got worse as time went on though, like on 98 where the round started off great, but once some BFBs broke down, the Moabs and Ceramics ran free. We were never really afraid of leaking, but that's not a good sign if he's shooting for first place on this list. Then the bad came and made it 13 laps around before Striker broke its outer layer. Luckily, there are few enough balloons inside that he could stun just about everything until popped and move on to the early hundreds. And these were interesting. There were enough balloons on screen that I couldn't track how far everything was getting, especially when mixing in that some of them were getting stunned. But he kept getting through. He even managed to pop the layered DDTs and BFBs on round 110. It wasn't pretty, and it took a very long time, but he got through. And this was the theme of the run. Just brute force stuns. Nothing fancy, nothing special, and it worked until round 115 where the fortified DDTs were too much. I don't think it even had to do with them being layered, they were just too fast and tanky for Striker to handle. So he did slightly worse than Corvus. And finally, we have Oben, my second most used hero only after Benjamin. We got him to level 20 on 49 and he was keeping the balloons at bay. Ceramics and weaker he could handle, while Moabs would make it to his brambles or wall of trees. But because we were constantly using these abilities, nothing made it past him for a while. In fact, it wasn't really until the 80s that Bloons started completing laps. Here, the ZOMGs were too big for his wall of trees, and brambles only do 500 damage a pierce. So it wasn't crazy to expect the 2 ZOMGs on 85 to get past. But his main attack was able to break these outer layers, and the trees ate up all the BFBs inside. After just a few of these lobsters though, it would be full and take a while for another wall to get placed down. This really showed itself on 96, where the map would be full of blimps, and where a different hero's level 10 ability would bail them out of this situation. The trees would pop a few BFBs and burst into bananas. Not the most ideal for this challenge. Still though, he was getting by. He even managed to pop the bad's outer layer in just 6.5 laps. How? Well, Brambles actually did a ton of work here as we were spamming them the entire round, and every time the bad went by, it'd have to pass over 1 or 2 of them. But we all knew this wouldn't last forever. Oben isn't known for his damage, he's known for boosting other magic monkeys like druids, and without them, he's pretty weak. It was round 104 with its hundreds of balloons and blimps that got through, and honestly, it wasn't even close. I got as far as I could with Quincy on every map, and here's how he did. We'll start off with Monkey Meadow. I put Quincy in the middle of the map and hit play. He handled the early rounds just fine as his arrows were bouncing from balloon to balloon, popping most of them before they got around the first loop. The nice thing about Quincy is that he gains experience as the rounds go on, making him stronger. So how long can he hold on for? Well, round 13 is when the balloons started getting pretty far, as plenty of them made it around the second loop, and one even made it past Quincy, having to get popped at the very end of the track. And round 14 is even harder with its layered greens and yellows. We handled the first rush just fine, but the second rush had way more balloons on screen that were eating up all of Quincy's pierce, making it so his arrows wouldn't always damage the yellows. This let the second rush get through, and we had to try again. Now, we have an ability that increases Quincy's attack speed for a short time, but I want to save that for the next round as it's much more difficult. So I microed Quincy, telling him what balloons to shoot at. For the first wave, we left him on first to take care of the greens and yellows, but once the second wave of greens got in his range, we switched him to strong. This way, he'll prioritize the yellows and greens over the reds and blues no matter how far they are along the track. With this, we were able to bring everything down to blues and reds by the final pass, and Quincy's bouncing arrows took care of the rest. Round 15 is like 14 but much harder as it introduces pink balloons, so we used Quincy's rapid shot ability to beat it. And even with that, a balloon almost made it to the end. But this put us in a pickle for round 16 as we weren't even close and rapid shot is still on cooldown. So this is Quincy's natural limit. We're not done though, as I want to see how far he can get if we max him out to level 20. Instantly, he started plowing through the rounds, which he should have as we just spent about 200 grand on him, but still he was making light work of these balloons. Even the round 40 Moab wasn't a challenge for him. Now I know that this map is pretty easy, but this is just the first of many and they get harder as we go. We're in beginner right now, but Quincy will pop his way through these, intermediate, advanced, and end it with the expert maps. Quincy coasted all the way to round 60 where we use his rapid shot ability to pop the BFB. He might have been able to handle it naturally, but popping all of those ceramics inside the Moabs is pretty tough for him. Then we used Storm of Arrows to clean up round 61, and he was fine as is with 62. But that brings us to round 63, one of the hardest rounds in the game with its 3 ceramic rushes. We took out the first with a rapid shot, the second with a storm of arrows, but the third leaked before rapid shot came back off cooldown. We tried a few more times, but after a bit, we moved on to stage 3 of the map, adding a 2-3-0 village. This makes Quincy attack faster and be able to pop every type of balloon, so his arrows can pop leads and the explosions can damage the black balloons now. With this, we used rapid shot the second the round started to start its cooldown early, and it lasted long enough to pop the first rush of ceramics. We arrow stormed the second rush and mashed our rapid shot button to use it right when it came off cooldown, and with this, we were barely able to beat round 63. But the next few rounds were pretty easy, only needing an ability some of the time, but the mid 70s are where it picked up again. I knew we needed Storm of Arrows for 76, so we built around that, using it on round 74 and rapid shot on round 75. This pattern was nice because it let us use rapid shot for the round 77 BFBs and Storm of Arrows for 78 ceramic rushes. But this brings us to round 79 where there were just too many balloons. Maybe if both abilities were off cooldown we could hold them off, but the 500 regrow rainbows and 4 BFBs overwhelmed Quincy. So round 79 is what I got on Monkey Meadow. Next, Quincy has Hedge and 1-2 Tree. These runs were almost identical, so we're combining them. The starts on both maps were super awkward. On Edge, we tried several spots, but the best turned out to be right below the rightmost wall. But even with this, the greens on round 9 were too much for him, and Quincy wasn't level 3 yet, so we couldn't even use a rapid shot to bail him out. As for 1-2 Tree, I put him right above lot 9. This also limited him on how much of the track he could see, but it works slightly better with his bounces. Quincy popped round 9 pretty easily, but I had to use a rapid shot for the yellows on round 12, making it impossible to pop all of 13. So pretty early, I upgraded Quincy to level 20 on both maps. From here, Quincy coasted until the 50s. On Hedge, I started using abilities on round 54, and 1-2 Tree, it was 55. And basically every round after needed an ability. But it was round 62 for both of them that we needed to add the village. There is no way we could get through this round without abilities otherwise, and we need them up for 63. In fact, even with this village, we needed a rapid shot to finish off the fortified ceramics on both maps. This gave us only one chance to beat round 63 as the leftover rapid shot doesn't save through a retry. But it wasn't even close. It didn't last long enough on either map and tons of balloons made it through. So round 63 is the limit for both of these. The next group of maps we have is Tree Stump, Middle of the Road, Candy Falls, Park Path, and Alpine Run. Kind of all over the place with the shapes and scenery, but Quincy did very similar on all of them. We put him in the obvious spot on every map and let him handle the early game. He basically made it to round 15 on all 5 of these maps. The only 2 exceptions were Tree Stump, where we couldn't pop all of round 14's yellows even with a rapid shot, and Park Path, where we made it to round 16 because we beat 14 with just some micro, letting us use rapid shot to beat round 15. So between rounds 14 and 16, we leveled Quincy up to max on all 5 maps and cruised through the rounds. For the most part, it was free until round 60, but some of the maps did require rapid shot or arrow storm for a hard round like 55. The 60s though, that's where it got tough. The BFB needed a rapid shot to take out, and we used a storm of arrows for round 61. I don't know why this round always got far, but it wasn't too bad because we didn't need an ability on any of these maps for round 62, meaning they'd be up and running again for 63. What we did need though was a village. On either round 62 or 63, we buffed Quincy with a Monkey Intelligence Bureau. With it, we could clean up round 62 without abilities and pop all of round 63 with our Rapid Shot Aerostorm Rapid Shot combo. For the rest of the games, we needed about an ability per round to squeak by. This was nice as the other ability would come off cooldown before it was needed, so we kept progressing. That is, until round 75, where on all 5 maps, Quincy needed both abilities to beat the round, and even with both, it was really close. But this left us without anything for round 76's Regrow Ceramics, and they pretty easily passed Quincy, making round 76 Quincy's score for these 5 maps. The next group of maps Quincy took on was Carved, In the Loop, End of the Road, and Frozen Over. On all 4 of these maps, the beginning was free, with no issues until round 13. But all we had to do for all of them was set Quincy to strong, so he would target the green balloons until some weaker ones were about to leak. Then set him to first for the rest of the round. And with this micro, we were able to save his ability for round 14, where we used it to pop all the yellows and greens. This did get us stuck on round 15, but that's a pretty good score for just Quincy. So this is when we upgraded Quincy to level 20 on all of these maps. Once again, Quincy started speedrunning the rounds, not needing any abilities to move on. In fact, 3 of the 4 maps, I didn't even use an ability until round 60 to take out the BFB. The only map we did need help before that was on Carved, where I used a Rapid Shot to beat round 55 and its dense packs of ceramics. Here, we also used a Storm of Arrows to finish off round 61, but on every other map, we just cruised to round 63. On all 4 of these maps, we got down a 2-3-0 village for this round and tried our Rapid Shot Aerostorm Rapid Shot combo. I tested this several times, but on Carved, In the Loop, and Frozen Over, we just couldn't beat the 3rd wave. There was just barely not enough uptime on Rapid Shot for us to pop all the ceramics, so round 63 is the score for these 3 maps. On End of the Road, we were able to pop them all though, and Rapid Shot lasted into the next round, making 64 pretty easy. I wish the next few rounds were as free, but Quincy had to fight for it. Round 65 needed a Rapid Shot as our screen was full of ceramics and BFBs were starting to enter the map, and round 66 needed a Storm of Arrows for the 3 fortified Moabs that got past Quincy while he was focusing on other balloons. Luckily, we were able to get both of these off cooldown because round 67 through 70 did not need an ability. Instead, Quincy's main attack was more than enough to pop everything. Round 71, we needed a Rapid Shot once the Moabs got pretty far and the ceramics were on their way back. I used Rapid Shot again at the end of round 72 to clean up what was left of a BFB, though I'm not sure if this one was needed. I was a bit afraid that I'd get hard stuck after wasting an ability, but the leftovers made the start of round 73 easy, and we ended the round with an Arrow Storm. Then, round 74 was long enough for Quincy to get both of his abilities back off cooldown, use Arrow Storm to pop the BFB in the middle of the round, and get it mostly off cooldown again. I didn't realize how long round 74 was until this run. But this brings us to round 75. I tried many times to beat the round with just a Rapid Shot so that we'd have a Storm of Arrows for round 76, but we always leaked. One Rapid Shot just wasn't enough. So after several tries, I used both of Quincy's abilities to beat the round and headed into 76 with some leftover Rapid Shot. But it wasn't even close, meaning this was my score on End of the Road. Moving on, we have Skates, Cubism, Town Center, and Resort. For our base Quincy, he was able to make it to round 16 on Skates and Cubism. Skates was a fun one because we had him far enough back to be able to use Rapid Shot on rounds 14 and 15, while on Cubism he beat 14 on his own and I used his ability to pass round 15. Resort was the easiest of the 4 as we didn't have to use Rapid Shot until round 15, and then through a ton of micro we beat 16 without an ability. This effort was worth it though, as it let us pop round 17's Regrow Rainbows with a Rapid Shot. Without an ability, this is a guaranteed sticking point as they'll out regrow his damage. This fun came to an end on round 18 though, as we couldn't handle all the greens. As for Town Center, we had a very easy start, but I panic pushed Rapid Shot on 13, making 14 impossible. While we could have beaten this had I not wasted Rapid Shot, there's no way we'd get past round 15, so we upgraded him and moved on. But this is where the 3 runs start to sync up. On every map but Cubism, we used Rapid Shot on round 60 to take out the BFB. Then on Town Center and Skates, we got a MIB for round 63. And on all 4, we did the Rapid Shot Aerostorm Rapid Shot combo. On Resort, we picked up the MIB on 64, and on all 4 maps, we kind of coasted through the rest of the 60s. We didn't really start using abilities until the 70s, which is also when we placed the Village on Cubism. Around 73. It was difficult to get past this point without it, as we were using abilities more often than the other 3 maps, but at this round I finally caved. Not only did we leak with both abilities being used, but I also didn't want to get hard stuck due to me spamming these. But from here, we did our standard procedure on all 4 maps. Use Storm of Arrows on 74, Rapid Shot on 75, Storm of Arrows on 76, and fight our way through the rest of the 70s. But on all 4 of these maps, we popped our way through round 78, but couldn't handle the crazy amount of bloons that come our way on 79. So this is Quincy's score once again. Next up, we have Tinkerton, Cabin, Lotus Island, and Winter Park. The starts were all pretty different, so we'll cover them separately, but the endings were quite similar. On Winter Park, we were able to micro our way to round 14, but then we had to use Rapid Shot to get past the first rush of yellows. Normally, a bad sign as the second wave is harder, but for whatever reason, the bounces aligned and we were able to squeak through with a mixture of last and strong targeting. And because we used Rapid Shot early into round 14, it came back in time for the start of 15, letting us beat this round as well. Round 16 wasn't happening though, so this is where I leveled Quincy up to 20. For Cabin, things were a bit harder. I put Quincy near the end of the track and he soloed the rounds perfectly until 12, where out of nowhere things got difficult. The yellows got past us even when we used a Rapid Shot at the end of the round, so we had to retry and activate it earlier to move on to round 13. Without it here though, Quincy was stuck and it was time to upgrade him. On Lotus Island, I played around with a ton of different placements, but what ended up working best was the usual spot up front. Here, things were pretty easy, but we did end up using Rapid Shot at the end of round 10 to handle the dense group of blues. A perk of this was that it lasted long enough to pop the yellows at the start of round 11, something that might have gotten past him otherwise. For round 12, a yellow also would have gotten past, but the flowers recently opened and we used the second one to stun it long enough for it to be popped down to 0. With this, we moved on to round 13 where we had to use Rapid Shot again to pop everything, which made us get stuck on round 14 even when we used the stunning flowers. And for Tinkerton, I put Quincy in the middle and cruised all the way through round 13, used his ability on 14, and got stuck on 15. Now, all of these maps were fairly easy for a level 20 Quincy until about round 50. Lotus Island was the hardest as I had to use Rapid Shot on the round 49 ceramics and again on round 54 for the Moabs. This made us super weak to the 4 ceramic rushes on 55, so we ended up getting a Mib here, which was enough for us to beat the round with his main attacks and an Arrow Storm. Winter Park was the next hardest of the 4 as we needed to Rapid Shot the same part of round 54, then Arrow Storm the last ceramic rush of 55. From here though, we coasted until the usual round 60 where we needed a Rapid Shot to finish off the BFB. Then we picked up a Mib for round 61. Those Moabs layered with Regrow Zebras always seemed to cause us trouble. Cabin was the third hardest as we didn't need anything until 55, which we got past with a single Rapid Shot, and we took out the BFB on 60 with this ability as well. Unlike Winter Park though, we got past round 61 with just an Arrow Storm, letting us wait until round 62 to purchase the village. Kind of risky as we want all our abilities off cooldown for 63, but 62 is long enough to make sure that is the case. And Tinkerton was surprisingly easy as we didn't use any abilities until the BFB came on round 60, where we used Rapid Shot as usual. Then I could have beaten round 61 with an Arrow Storm, but decided to play it safe, get our Mib, and save our abilities. I knew round 63 would be a doozy and we'd need every advantage we could get. Even with this in mind, round 63 took us out. We just couldn't get Rapid Shot back in time for Quincy to be able to pop the third rush of ceramics, and this was the case for all 4 maps. They were all close, but we just needed a slightly shorter cooldown for us to be able to pull it off. So around 63 is the score we got for these 4. On to 4 circles, Scrapyard, and Logs. Starting with the first, we put Quincy down in the dead center of the map and let her run. I didn't have to use any micro to beat the round until 15, where we used a Rapid Shot to take out all the yellows and pinks. I was feeling pretty high and mighty, but even with some leftover Rapid Shot, round 16 put us in our place as we weren't even close to beating it. Scrapyard and Logs though, they were a different story. On Scrapyard, I put Quincy on top of the crate right next to the Crusher. This way he could see the track several different times and hit stun balloons in the future. In this spot, we pretty easily made it to round 14, where we used the Crusher to get by. We wouldn't have had to use this, but Quincy kept missing the yellows, so this map effect bailed him out. But this let us save Rapid Shot for the pinks on round 15, cleaning them up without any worry of leaking. Then the Crusher was back up and running for 16, which we used on a massive group of yellows and greens that surely would have gotten through otherwise. I was kind of treating the Crusher like a second ability, as every time we used one, the other would come off cooldown. So round 17's Regrow Rainbows were all popped with a Rapid Shot, but this put us on round 18. I tried several times, but Quincy just couldn't pop all the greens even with the help of the Crusher. A few balloons got through every time, so this is when we had to level him up to 20. As for Logs, we put Quincy just below the pool of water and hit play. He made it all the way to round 14 without any help, and here we just had to change his targeting to strong for the first rush and back to first for the second to get past this round. And we used Rapid Shot to take out round 15. I thought round 16 would be super difficult, but we got past it first try. We just set Quincy to last until he popped all the yellows to greens, then switched him over to first to finish off the round. and Rapid Shot was back up in time just in time for the regrow yellows of 17. But this brings us to round 18. We got so close so many times as Rapid Shot almost came back up in time to beat the round, but after several attempts I leveled him up and moved on. So Logs and Scrapyard both have the lead with round 18. As you can imagine, all three of these maps were pretty hands off for the next 40 plus rounds. In fact, none of them even needed a Rapid Shot for the round 60 BFB, or for the layered Moabs and Zebras of 61. So Quincy made it to round 63 without any abilities since leveling him up. Here though, we did have to do our classic Rapid Shot Aerostorm Rapid Shot combo. And even with this, we needed to get down a village on Scrapyard. Quincy was fine without a MIB on the other two maps until round 75, where he needed to pop the entire round without using Aerostorm. This wasn't too bad once we added in the village, as I just activated Rapid Shot once he started breaking down the final BFBs to Moabs. This would last long enough to take out most of the round, and in the case of Scrapyard, we were able to pop a ton of Bloons with the Crusher during this time. Round 76 was super easy on all three maps, as we just used Storm of Arrows, and we made our way to round 79. Quincy's current record. On 4 circles, I waited as long as we possibly could before using Rapid Strike. This pushed the regrow rainbows all the way back to the entrance, as well as popping the first BFB. Then the rainbows slowly floated their way back through the track, and once they got close to leaking, I used Aerostorm. This took out another BFB and cleared the screen of rainbows once again. Then I mashed Rapid Strike, using it the second it came off cooldown. This popped everything but the last fortified BFB, which Quincy was able to take out with just his main attack. So we're on to round 80, facing our first ZOMG of the day. I opened up with a Rapid Strike, which brought it down to just Moabs and Ceramics, and we popped those with an Aerostorm. I was a bit afraid that I used too much to beat the round, but I didn't see any other way. Luckily, round 81 was just slow enough for Rapid Strike to come off cooldown, and I used it to pop the first half of the round. Then, right as it looked like we were going to leak, Aerostorm came back, bailing us out and cleared the rest of the round. But we didn't stand a chance against round 82. I used Rapid Shot and Aerostorm, but the fortified BFBs were just too much for us to handle. So 82 is where I'm calling it. Back to Scrapyard. Round 79 took forever, but what finally got us through was using Rapid Strike once the rainbows made it to the Crusher. This pushed them back for a bit, but once they were going to get past Quincy altogether, I used Storm of Arrows to buy us more time. Then we used the Crusher and Rapid Shot once the Bloons made it back to Quincy. This took out all the rainbows for the round and only left us with a few BFBs to pop. Quincy's main attack took out all the normal ones, and a Rapid Shot took out the 2 fortified ones. Then, Quincy was placed so far back that by the time the round 80 ZOMG got to him, we had Rapid Shot back online, so we popped the outer layers with that and the innards with Aerostorm once again. Round 81 wasn't too bad as we took out the first few BFBs with a Rapid Shot, some of the insides with an Aerostorm, and finished off the round with a second Rapid Shot and the Crusher. But this brought us to round 82, where we faced the same problem we did on 4 circles. The fortified BFBs were just too much, even though we had both abilities ready and the Crusher. We got so close a few times, but were never able to beat the round. But that leaves us with Logs, the last beginner map. We handled round 79 through 81 exactly like we did on Scrapyard and 4 circles, and headed into round 82 with Rapid Shot ready and Storm of Arrows halfway through its cooldown. I waited until the Bloons were about to leak before activating Rapid Shot. This popped everything but the fortified BFBs. Then, I let Quincy get a few of them down to either Moabs or Ceramics before using an Aerostorm. This lined up perfectly on the map to leave us with only 2 BFBs, which we brought down to Ceramics before finishing them off with a final Rapid Strike. So, we set a new record, getting to round 83. But here, the Super Ceramics leaked before either of our abilities came back off cooldown, so there was nothing we could do. But round 83 is Quincy's new record. This was the last beginner map, so I averaged out Quincy's score so we could compare them to the other difficulties later on. On average, base Quincy made it to round 15 before we had to level him up, and his maxed out average was round 72. But now we're on to the intermediate maps. This is where the difficulty starts to ramp up, and we still have advanced and expert maps later on. Up first is Luminous Cove. To give Quincy a nice spot, I brought in an ice monkey to make a platform on the water for him. I made sure it wouldn't hit any Bloons, I just wanted Quincy to be happy. We coasted through the early game until round 12, where I had to micro a bit to get through the round. Nothing hard, I just set Quincy to strong to damage the yellows, then back to first to finish the round. Unfortunately, we were forced to use Rapid Shot on round 13, so 14 was the limit for base Quincy. Once we leveled him up to 20, he took off until round 54, where we needed Rapid Shot to pop all the Ceramics and Moabs. I thought this would make 55 tricky, but it only took an Aerostorm on the 4th Ceramic Rush to best the round. From here, we didn't need an ability until round 60, where we used Rapid Shot to pop the BFB and then Aerostorm for 61. Then I accidentally beat round 62 with an arrow storm, making 63 impossible. So I loaded back in and beat the round without abilities, but with a MIB. This gave us everything for 63, but even with it, I couldn't beat the third rush, making 63 Quincy's limit on Luminous Cove. The next map is Sulphur Springs. I put Quincy up top by the pool of water and let him shoot away. He made it to round 13 before we had to micro him a bit to beat the round. Then we used Rapid Shot to beat round 14 and got stuck on 15. Pretty standard stuff, but after I leveled him up to 20, we coasted to round 55, where I used Rapid Shot to finish off the ceramics and again on the BFB to beat round 60. For round 61, we could have used an Arrow Storm, but I wanted to get ready for 63, so I set up the MIB. I didn't want to risk freezing any balloons, so we put our MIB down on the frontmost island. But it could just barely not reach Quincy, so we buffed it with a second village to give it more range, and surprisingly, this worked. With this, we beat round 61 and 62 without issue, but round 63 was still too tough. The third rush leaked right before Rapid Shot came back off cooldown, so this is his max once again. On to Winter Park. I put Quincy on the pink slide so that he could see plenty of both tracks. This worked out better than I thought it would, as he had no issue until round 10, where all it took was a retry to pop everything. No micro, no abilities, just a redo. But it was round 12 that we needed a Rapid Shot to take out the yellows, leaving us weak to 13. So that's when we leveled him up to 20. This worked until round 49, where a Rapid Shot was needed to take out the ceramics on the right track. Then we needed to use it again on round 50 to pop the first Moab, fortified leads, and some ceramics. Rounds 51 and 52 were free, but Quincy needed a Rapid Shot to help out with the 3 Moabs on 53. Then we had to finish off the end of round 54 with a Storm of Arrows. This would be fine, as Rapid Shot will be back in time for the 4th ceramic rush of 55, but even when we buffed Quincy with the MIB, his main attacks couldn't handle the first rush. So round 55 is where Water Park won. Polyphemus, one of our first difficult maps, is up. It took quite a few tries, but eventually Quincy beat round 6 on his own. But we never got past round 7. I tried several more spots, but eventually we just put him next to the eye and maxed him out. From here, no abilities were needed until the ceramics on round 47. Without this extra attack speed, a few balloons would slip through while he focused on the other side. I also had to Rapid Shot the fortified ceramics at the end of 48, and we bought a MIB for round 49 as the ceramics kept getting passed. Even with this though, we needed a Storm of Arrows to move on. Round 50 needed both abilities, and even still we barely popped the final balloons inside the Moab. I used Rapid Shot again on round 52 for the Moabs at the end of the round, but that put it on cooldown for 53. To buy some time, we Arrow Stormed the first Moab of the round and popped the final 2 with a Rapid Shot once it came back off cooldown. But this made round 54 impossible, ending our Polyphemus run. On to Covered Garden, which was a fun one, because we can't micro Quincy when he's under the glass, so we just have to hope that he can continue popping the rounds. I put him in the top left and everything was great. He popped the next 4 rounds no problem, letting the glass ceiling open on him once again. I used Rapid Shot to pop the final blues on round 10, and the leftover duration was enough to handle the yellows on 11. But it was round 12 that we got stuck on. Maybe if we could have microed him we would have had a chance, but without it the yellows flew right past us. Because he was under the glass though, we had to start over and level him up to 20 while the ceiling was open. But in this spot, he crushed the rounds until 49, where we had to use a Rapid Shot for the ceramics. This round was a non-factor on beginner maps, but now it seems like we leak on it every time on intermediate ones. Fast forward a couple rounds, and we used Rapid Shot again to finish off rounds 52 and 54, but now we're on 55. Quincy took out the first wave with the leftover Rapid Shot, but the second wave got right through. So we had to load back into round 54, place down a MIB to buff Quincy, and run it back. Even with this though, his normal attacks weren't enough, so we had to use Rapid Shot for the end of the first rush, and it lasted long enough to take out the second and third one as well. Then we popped the fourth with a Storm of Arrows, and the Moab with his normal attacks. But this setup let us get all the way to round 62, where we had to use Rapid Shot on the fortified Moabs to beat the round, so we had no chance of beating round 63. Now, round 63 has been an absolute killer so far in intermediates, and it continued to be this way. So I'm going to save us all some time and a ton of repetition by grouping every intermediate map left that died to 63. That list is A Quiet Street, Balance, Downstream, Firing Range, Haunted, Moon Landing, Quarry, Spice Islands, Spring, and Streambed, all of which lost either because we used an ability to beat round 62 or because our normal combo just wasn't enough. But I will go through how far base Quincy made it on all of them. On a quiet street, Quincy made it to round 8 before we had to upgrade him. It was a little sad that we couldn't micro our way through it, but this track was tough for him with the Bloons coming from both sides. On balance and downstream, he made it quite a bit farther, but we ended up using Rapid Shot on round 13, so he capped out on 14 on both these maps. For firing range, we removed the obstacle and gave him an amazing starting spot. This even let him get through round 13 with just a bit of micro, letting us beat 14 with a Rapid Shot, so 15 was his cap here. Haunted was pretty tough, and even after microing for a while, round 8 is where Quincy hit his limit. Moon Landing and Quarry both needed a Rapid Shot for round 13, making 14 when we leveled him up. Spice Islands needed a Rapid Shot for the yellows on 12, so 13 took Quincy down. Spring was surprisingly tricky, and he only made it to round 9 even with a bunch of micro. The sad part was that we were one round away from Quincy hitting level 3, unlocking his ability, which would have pushed him a bit farther. And the last intermediate map that got stuck on round 63 was Stream Bed. Here, we removed the obstacle and put Quincy near the middle of the track. He ran free and even managed to beat round 13 with some micro, letting us pop 14 with Rapid Shot. So this was one of the farther ones as Quincy made it to round 15. But that only leaves 8 intermediate maps left, and we can group 4 of them pretty easily. Bazaar, Chutes, Encrypted, and Rake. These were up there with Polyphemus for the hardest map so far. Bazaar and Chutes, we only made it to round 7 before having to level up Quincy, and Rake and Encrypted we made it to round 9, all of which were before Quincy unlocked Rapid Shot. I tried several different spots on each map to put Quincy, but this is what we settled on. On Bazaar, I put him right above the cat tent, right in the middle of the map on Encrypted, in the bottom middle on Chutes, and to the left of the statue on Rake. Like usual, a max level Quincy destroyed the early rounds, but he started struggling earlier. On Bazaar and Chutes, I had to use Rapid Shot to take out the round 40 Moab, and then an ability or 2 per round in the 50s. While on Encrypted and Rake, we were able to get by with a bit less. But then the mid-50s came. Bazaar was the first to lose because we needed a MIB and both abilities to get past round 53, making round 54 impossible even with some leftover Rapid Shot, as 2 red balloons from the first Moab got through. As for the other 3 maps, Quincy lost on round 55 on all of them. Encrypted was tough because there wasn't room for a MIB, while on Rake and Chutes he just wasn't able to keep up with all the ceramics even with the buffs. Bloonarius Prime was another hard one as Quincy had to cover 2 separate tracks. I put Quincy in the bottom middle of the map as he can see plenty of both, and after several tries I finally accepted that he wasn't going to beat round 7. So we upgraded him to 20 and let him run. We had to use Rapid Shot on the round 40 Moab and again on the ceramics on 47. At this point, I was afraid of the right track as we're a bit weaker on that side, but I figured if we saved some abilities we'd be okay. Round 53 was the next difficult round that happened to be on the right side, and this is where I gave Quincy his village. Even with this, we needed a Rapid Shot to pop the 3 Moabs, but the next couple rounds were pretty easy. We didn't even need an ability on 55. However, it was a combination of rounds 59 through 61 that took us out. Because round 59 is on the right side, we needed to use a Rapid Shot to pop the Regrow Ceramics. This made it be on cooldown for the BFB, so we had to use Storm of Arrows to take that out. Then we only had 1 Rapid Shot for all the Zebras and Moabs that come on round 61. Each time it looked promising, but we were never able to pop the final Moab as Rapid Shot's duration was slightly too short, so 61 is his cap here. We have 3 intermediate maps left: Adora's Temple, Carts and Darts, and Cracked. Starting with Adora's Temple, I put Quincy in the middle left of the pyramid and hit play. This let him hit quite a bit of the track and he made it to round 11 without needing any micro or abilities. But the yellows here were just too fast, making me use Rapid Shot to take them out. So round 12 is when we upgraded him to level 20 as we couldn't handle the yellows on this round either. He popped the waves no issue until round 46 where the fortified ceramics were a little too tanky to be taken out in time. Nothing a little Rapid Shot couldn't fix though, and we were back to the races. This map turned out to be really nice for Quincy because it split the balloons into 2 separate waves, so Pierce usually wasn't an issue, and he could see the final pass for each track at least a little bit. We continued on using abilities on the normal rounds like 49 and 53, but round 54 was hard enough for us to pick up the MIB. And with this, we beat round 55 without any abilities. But this brings us to round 63. The first rush wasn't too bad as we just needed a Rapid Shot to beat it, but the second was a bit scary because the ceramics were split on opposite sides of the map. I had to wait until the balloons were near the center of the temple before using Arrow Storm. Luckily, this had the range to clear the screen and Rapid Shot came back up in time to finish the final rush before they leaked. This excitement was short-lived though because we couldn't beat round 64 as both abilities were on cooldown, so this is his limit here. For Carts and Darts, I put Quincy in the center of the map. This let him get to round 12 before having to use Rapid Shot to pop the yellows. Then he beat round 13 with just a bit of micro, and Rapid Shot came back up in time for us to beat round 14. Needless to say, we didn't get close to popping round 15, so we maxed him out. The next 50 rounds were a piece of cake, as we didn't even need a village until round 63. I wanted to get past this round without it, but we needed the MIB and our classic 3 ability combo to beat the round. And surprisingly, this was enough to beat round 64 without any abilities, so we were back in business. I used the Rapid Shot for the BFBs on 65 and Aerostorm on 66, but other than that, we cruised to the 70s. The fun and games came to an end on round 75 though, as we needed both abilities to get by. Rapid Shot for the first half of the round and an Aerostorm for the second half, which left us weak to round 76. If Storm of Arrows carried over from round to round, we would have been fine, but it doesn't, even though its animation does. And for Cracked, the start was basically the same. We used Rapid Shot for rounds 11 and 14, making 15 Quincy's limit. Then we leveled him up to 20 and didn't need to use any abilities until the round 60 BFB, similar to how we did on some beginner maps. Once again, I tried to get past round 63 without a MIB, but we were slightly too weak. So we put down a village, did his round 63 combo, and moved on. We've used his abilities from time to time, but round 75 was the next difficult one. That being said, all we had to do was use Rapid Shot once the second to last group of BFBs broke down into ceramics and he was able to finish the round. This let us use Storm of Arrows for 76, and our cooldowns lined up perfectly. Rapid Shot was back up in time for the BFBs that end round 77, and Storm of Arrows was back in time for both ceramic rushes on 78. Unfortunately, no matter what we did, we couldn't get past round 79. Quincy popped all the rainbows, but then everything was on cooldown for the fortified BFBs, and we weren't even close to popping those. But getting to round 79 on an intermediate map is not bad at all, especially when you zoom out and see that the average max round for Quincy was 62 on these maps, and he made it to round 11 on average before needing to be leveled up. Compare this to the round 72 and 15 of beginner maps, and it's easy to see the jump in difficulty. But now it's time for another jump as we're starting the advanced maps. The first one we'll cover is Castle Revenge, the map that moves. Unfortunately, no matter where we put him, base Quincy could not beat round 6, so I put him on top and leveled him up to 20. Here, he was able to pop the rounds just fine, but it only took until round 14 for a yellow to get by, forcing us to use Storm of Arrows already. As you can imagine, this means we had to use Rapid Shot for the pinks on 15. We're only in the mid-teens and already are in a tricky spot as both of Quincy's abilities are on cooldown. Luckily, we didn't need either of these again until round 19, where I used Rapid Shot to take out all the pinks that come at the end of the round. Then, round 21 needed a Storm of Arrows to pick off some Bloons that would have leaked. What's interesting about this map is that it's not every round with pinks and yellows that cause Quincy problems. It's just if there are spaced ones, because it prevents his arrows from bouncing from pink to pink if they're far enough apart, and if this happens, a couple can sneak through. For example, we crushed round 25's yellows and purples, but needed a Rapid Shot for the pinks of 26. The leads that come on 28 and 30 were not an issue, and neither were the spaced blacks and whites because of how slow they are. But the purples on 32 caused us some problems, and Quincy had to Rapid Shot his way out of the round. But then we got a coast for a little bit. Surprisingly, the rainbows on 35 weren't hard, but we did have to Rapid Shot the last rush of pinks on round 36. But then it finally hit us, round 38. Even with a MIB, we weren't able to beat this round. The early stages took both of our abilities, and we just didn't have the time to take out the ceramics. Next up, we have X Factor, Pat's Pond, Peninsula, and Erosion. Unfortunately for Quincy, the only map he beat round 6 on was Erosion, and he made it all the way to round 9 before getting stuck. So I quickly upgraded him to 20 on all of these maps and continued on. I decided to put Quincy on the left side of the bunker as he can easily see every track from here, but every once in a while it would cause targeting problems, like on round 21. Sometimes Bloons got by when he could have popped everything had he shot them in the right order, and I'd have to use a Rapid Shot to bail him out. This normally wouldn't happen though, so it wasn't too bad. Round 36 forced us to give him a MIB because even the first rush of pinks was getting through, and I didn't want to get stuck on 37 because I used both Rapid Shot and Aerostorm here. With the MIB though, we were able to move on using about an ability per round. The hardest one by far was 49 as the Bloons came from the top, which sometimes messes up Quincy, and we had to time Rapid Shot well enough to take out all the ceramics. This wasn't too bad though, as we still got both abilities up for round 50, but even with them, we couldn't handle all the ceramics in both Moabs. As for Pat's Pond and Peninsula, we were able to beat round 50 using one ability to take out the first Moab and the other to take out the second. On both these maps, round 51 was free, letting us get our abilities off cooldown for 52. On Peninsula, Quincy used Rapid Shot to take out both Moabs, while on Pat's Pond he had to use Rapid Shot for one and an Aerostorm for the other. But in both cases, he wasn't even close to being able to pop the 3 Moabs on 53. And for erosion, I did something a bit cheeky. We let level 20 Quincy shoot away until the ice melted. This sold him and I replaced him on the next sheet of ice. This is kind of a gray area, so if you think it's cheating, we'll say Quincy's limit is around 36, as before that he could reach the first track and pop everything. But if we are allowed to replace him, it's the same as Peninsula and Pat's Pond. Basically the same thing happened here, as we had to use Rapid Shot to pop around 52 and Storm of Arrows wasn't enough for 53. Maybe had we gone back and optimized so Rapid Shot would be up for 53 instead of Arrow Storm, we could move on, but even then we couldn't get past 55. The next few maps we have are geared, sunken columns off the coast, and another brick. For another brick, Quincy was able to make it to round 9 all by himself when we placed him at the start of the track, while in the other 3 maps he was only able to beat round 6. Sticking with another brick, it was easy enough that I didn't even need to use an ability until round 46's Fortified Ceramics, meaning Quincy can handle a Moab on this map without abilities or a village. Unfortunately, when there was more than just a Moab on screen, we did have to use an ability. Like on round 50 where we needed a Storm of Arrows to finish the insides of the second one. But it wasn't until round 53 that we had to get a Mib down, and then Quincy was able to handle all the Moabs on this round without an ability. We did need to use a Storm of Arrows on 54 though, making round 55 impossible. One Rapid Shot for this round just wasn't enough, as his base attacks couldn't clear the ceramic rushes. Sunken Columns and Off the Coast were almost exactly the same as this run. They both needed Rapid Shot on 46 and 49. I got Quincy his Mib in the early 50s, and we had to use an ability to beat round 54, leaving us too weak to beat round 55. In fact, the only big difference was that on Sunken Columns, Quincy needed a Rapid Shot for round 40, but other than that, they were shockingly similar. But that brings us to Geared, our next controversial one. You see, a maxed out Quincy could easily pop round 6 through 10, but would lose on round 11 as the map would rotate him out of range to see the track. So 11 is his unofficial limit. But I got a few heli pilots and moved him around the map whenever possible to keep him attacking. This was an absolute nightmare to do because you can't move him in between rounds, meaning we had to find gaps in the balloons to move him. This caused many unnecessary retries, but I was slowly getting the hang of it. I just had to make sure not to fall behind and have Quincy get stuck on the bottom half of the map. The first time this almost happened was on round 45, where I had to quickly move Quincy from below the heli pilots to the top part of the track before the rainbows got too far. Once we got past this round though, it wasn't too hard to get to round 53. To help out, I started placing Mibs around the track so Quincy would always be buffed even after we move him. With this, we were able to get past 53 with an Arrow Storm and round 54 with a Rapid Shot near the end of the round. But round 55 simply wasn't going to happen, just like the previous few maps. So round 11 or 55 is Quincy's cap here. The next group is Dark Path, High Finance, Spillway, and Cornfield. All 4 of them, Quincy made it pretty far before getting leveled up. On Dark Path, he made it to 14 as we used Rapid Shot on round 13. On High Finance, he got to 11 as we used Rapid Shot on 10. And although we had some leftover attacks for the next round, Quincy missed his first few shots on the yellows, causing them to leak. And on Spillway and Cornfield, Quincy made it to round 12. On both these maps, we used Rapid Shot at the end of round 10 as well, but Quincy was able to pop round 11 either with some leftovers or just with his normal attacks. After leveling up to 20, all these runs followed a similar path. Coast through the early game, use Rapid Shot on rounds 46 and 49, and get a Mib in the early 50s. The earliest village of these maps was on High Finance, where we got it on round 51, and the latest was on Spillway, where we managed to wait all the way until round 56. But for the first time in a while, we made it to the 60s. From here, all 4 maps were exactly the same. We used Rapid Shot on the BFB, then on round 61, we waited as long as we possibly could before using an Arrow Storm to pop a ton of Zebras and Moabs, and we were forced to use Rapid Shot again on round 62 to pop the Fortified Moabs that end the round. Even with some micro on Cornfield, I wasn't able to take these 2 out without an ability, which made round 63 impossible. Still though, Quincy getting all the way here by himself is impressive on such hard maps. But that just leaves Midnight Mansion, Mesa, Underground, and Cargo left for the advanced ones. For Midnight Mansion and Mesa, Quincy was not able to beat round 6 at level 1, though it was pretty close. On Underground, he beat round 6 but was never able to pop everything on round 7, even with a ton of micro. But Cargo was different, as after a few tries we were able to get all the way to round 12. We got here by using the Rapid Shot trick to pop the final group of blues on round 10 and had the leftovers pop the yellows on round 11. For the rest of the run, Midnight Mansion and Cargo were pretty similar, as in the 40s I only needed Rapid Shot and I used them at the exact same times. Round 40 for the Moab, round 46 for the Fortified Ceramics, and round 49 for the Layered Ceramics. Whereas Mesa and Underground were a little more hands-on. Mesa needed all these and an arrow storm for the start of round 47, while Underground needed this plus a rapid shot for the ceramics on 43 and the fortified ceramics on 48. This made us pivot to using an arrow storm for the ceramics on 49, but all of these made it to the 50s where they synced up. Whether it was a storm of arrows or rapid shot, we used at least one of them on rounds 50, 52, and 53, barely scraping by. I mean, on Midnight Mansion and Mesa, our abilities came off cooldown just in time to beat the round, but then Quincy got stuck on all 4 of these maps, making his score around 54. With these, Quincy's average round on advanced maps was 8 and his maxed out average was 55, about 7 rounds lower than intermediate maps and 17 lower than beginners. But that only leaves the experts. We'll start off with the one we cheated on, Glacial Trail. Surprisingly, base Quincy actually made it to round 9 here. A big reason for this is the extra XP heroes get on harder maps as he hit level 2 after just beating round 6. This extra pierce let him handle rounds 7 and 8, but the greens on round 9 were just too much. So we leveled him up to 20 and hit play. Obviously, he crushed the next few rounds, but on 15 he froze solid. The gimmick of this map is that every 10 rounds your towers freeze and are unable to attack or use abilities. So this is where he lost. But I did say we cheated, so we loaded back in with selling enabled and hit play. Every time Quincy was getting close to freezing, I would sell and replace him, resetting the timer. With this, Quincy was able to go until round 46 without abilities, where I used Rapid Shot for the fortified ceramics and again on 49's layered ceramics. But round 50 showed us something interesting. If Quincy isn't distracted by other balloons, he can pop a Moab without an ability thanks to this little loop, which means the 50s will be slightly easier than some of the advanced maps. Round 52 needed a rapid shot as there were some ceramics going at the same time as the Moab, and 53 only needed a storm of arrows for the last Moab. This let us clear round 54 with a rapid shot, but the first ceramic rush of 55 blew right past us. Even when I added a MIB to this setup, Quincy couldn't get past the first wave, so his score is either 55 or 15, depending on if you accept the cheating. Next, we'll get all the cheeky ones out of the way. So Dark Dungeons, Quad, Ravine, Bloody Puddles, and Muddy Puddles are up. On Dark Dungeons, there wasn't a spot we could place Quincy, level 1 or 20, that he could beat round 6, even when we used the spike traps to help out. This goes for Quad as well, as even with level 20 and a village, he didn't have the range to see all 4 tracks, and I couldn't figure out a spot to get the perfect bounces to pop everything. On Ravine, base Quincy couldn't solo round 6 even with the help of the sword, so I had to level him up. But even with this, there wasn't a spot we could place him to be able to pop the other 2 tracks, so round 7 was his limit. For Bloody Puddles, base Quincy couldn't even see both active tracks, so it was an insta loss, but a level 20 Quincy with a village could, and he was able to last until the active tracks were the far left and right ones on round 9. And Muddy Puddles was a fun one, because in a normal Chimps game, a Quincy start is usually the way to go. So we put him in his spot near the leftmost track and hit play. His base attacks are just enough to beat the first few rounds with a bit of micro, and normally you'd pick up some other towers. But base Quincy was able to make it to round 9 where the balloons started coming down the right middle track. This was the same if we leveled him up to 20, however, with this new popping power, we can get away with a new starting spot. If we put him next to the middle left track and buff him with the MIB, Quincy actually has the range and damage to beat rounds 6 through 9, meaning round 10 is his cap here. Next up is Infernal, another map where a Quincy start is common. Here, we put him in the bottom middle of the track and he soloed round 6. After this though, he had to be leveled up to max to continue on. With slightly more range and more popping power, he hauled through the early game, not even needing an ability for the round 40 Moab. In fact, if the round was even, it was a safe bet that Quincy could handle it because of how much time he had to attack the balloons. Odds though, those were his kryptonite. He needed a rapid shot for the ceramics on rounds 47 and 49, and the balloons were just getting started. Round 51 took a rapid shot for the start of the round and an arrow storm for the end. Round 53 surprisingly only took one rapid shot to take out all 3 mobs. And finally, here is where Quincy needed some help on the bottom track. On round 54, we used an arrow storm for the 2 Moabs. This is the only even round we used an ability on all run, and we lost shortly after as round 55 was too much for Quincy. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough room to buff him with the MIB, but even with that, I doubt he would have beaten the round. Moving on, we have Sanctuary. I tried several platforms, but Quincy was unable to beat round 6, so we put him in the top middle and leveled him up to 20. This worked great until the pinks on round 21 came through, where a rapid shot was needed to take them all out. This reminded me of some other maps like Castle Revenge, where spaced pinks were our weakness, and X Factor, where we could get unlucky with how the rounds lined up with where the platforms are, making some rounds more difficult if Quincy is off center. Anyway, we used Arrow Storm to pop the round 40 Moab, Rapid Shot to pop the ceramics on 43 and 46, and we placed the village and used Storm of Arrows to pop the ceramics on 47. This set up nicely to follow our typical routine of rapid shotting round 49, using both abilities on round 50 and getting them off cooldown during the very easy round 51. Then we used Storm of Arrows for the 2 Moabs on 52 and a Rapid Shot for the 3 that come next round. I didn't expect the 2 tracks converging in the middle to be so nice for his abilities, but I'm not complaining. Anyway, this left us pretty defenseless for round 54, and although Quincy's platform was perfectly centered, we couldn't handle the ceramics that were sent our way, let alone the Moabs that were coming. Similar to this, we have Flooded Valley. Here, base Quincy also couldn't beat round 6, though trying over and over again was a bit more annoying as I had to break the dam and make an ice bridge every time, only to realize it wasn't going to work. After a while, I accepted the loss and upgraded him to 20. Here, he hauled all the way through round 40 before needing his first ability to move on. Then, we used Rapid Shot again on round 46 for the fortified ceramics, and the leftovers of this ability were enough to pop all the ceramics on 47, saving us an Arrow Storm. Unfortunately, we needed to use a Rapid Shot for the fortified ceramics that end round 48, so 49 was going to be a bit scary. Even with a storm of arrows, some Bloons got through, so we slapped down the village and tried again. I waited as long as possible, but once I saw a pink Bloon getting by, I Arrow Stormed, and thankfully it took out all the ceramics. This left us with a Rapid Shot to start round 50 and take out the first Moab, and Quincy's main attack was just enough to pop the Bloons until we could use a Storm of Arrows to pop the end of the round. Then we did something I tried to not do. I used Rapid Shot for the 2 Moabs on round 52 because Storm of Arrows was still on cooldown. This usually makes round 53 impossible, but because of the order that the Moabs spawned, we were able to pop the first 2 with an Arrow Storm, and Rapid Shot just barely came off cooldown in time to pop the Child Bloons of the final Moab. But even with a lot of leftover Rapid Shot, we weren't even close to beating round 54. Next up, we have #ouch, and base Quincy wasn't able to beat round 6. In fact, he wasn't able to for the rest of the maps, so I'll just be skipping over that part from here on out. I drained the water and placed Quincy in the dead center of the map so he could see all 4 tracks. This worked great, and he was actually close enough to them to not miss space pinks like he would on other maps in the past. That being said, it wasn't too hard to overrun him as he quickly fell behind the yellows of 34 to the point where I had to use a Rapid Shot to beat the round and use it again on 35 as we faced the same issue but with pinks. Funny enough, the grouped pinks of 36 were fine as we got way more bounces out of our arrows when they were this close, and round 37 was the first time that we had to use Rapid Shot to keep up with leads all day. We could have gotten around this with a MIB, but rounds 38 and 39 normally don't require an ability, so I thought we'd be fine using it here. Unfortunately, that was not the case, as even with a Storm of Arrows, he lost to 38, so I ended up purchasing the village anyway. This let us beat the rest of the 30s without issue, and I got to Rapid Shot the Moab for a free round. We coasted until 43, where I used Rapid Shot for the ceramics, and it came back off cooldown in time for round 45. Even with both abilities though, we weren't able to handle the 180 pinks that come on this round. Shifting gears, we have the 2 maps only available in the challenge editor, Protect the Yacht and Bloons. We'll start with the latter, where Quincy didn't need any help from me until round 40, where we popped the Moab with a Storm of Arrows. Then on round 43, we needed a Rapid Shot for the ceramics as Quincy just didn't have enough time to pop them on such a short map. This happened again on 46 and 48, as dealing this much damage in such little time is tricky to do with just 1 tower. This made round 49 tough though, as we didn't have Rapid Shot up for this rush, so I put down the MIB for extra attack speed and the normal damage type. This village plus a Storm of Arrows was more than enough to beat the round. On 50, I had to open with a Rapid Shot to pop the first Moab and finish it with a Storm of Arrows for the second one. And round 52, we needed to use Rapid Shot for the 2 Moabs, but this left us on round 53 with just an Arrow Storm, which wasn't enough to beat the round. Protect the Yacht was similar in that Quincy didn't need any help until round 40, where we used Rapid Shot to pop the Moab, and again on 43 for the ceramics. We struggled with basically the same rounds, but here was a little tougher than Bloons as the 2 tracks were more difficult than that one short one. Round 46 took a Rapid Shot to get by, and a single Arrow Storm wasn't enough to beat round 47, so this is where we gave Quincy the MIB. With this, he was barely able to get past the ceramics on this round, but round 48 was long enough for him to get both abilities off cooldown. This let us use Rapid Shot on round 49 ceramics and get it back in time for round 50. Even with both abilities ready though, there wasn't an order we could do to beat the round. The ceramics or final Moab would always get through, as the Moab was so slow that Rapid Shot would wear off before it got in Quincy's range. Speaking of Protect the Yacht, if you guys purchase anything in-game, make sure to use creator code HBOM to support the channel. It helps me out a lot. But with that, we have 2 maps left, Dark Castle and Workshop. On Dark Castle, we put Quincy in the top middle of the map just above the track. This let him tear through the rounds as all 4 of the paths converged to this point, and in the 30s I removed all the trees as occasionally his arrows would bounce over there and will happily take the extra damage when they hit a balloon. Once again, we needed a Rapid Shot for the first Moab, but the rest of the 40s were easier than some of the other maps. Round 43 didn't need an ability, so the first time we used it since the Moab was on 46, and the leftovers from here were enough to pop everything on round 47. So Quincy was looking pretty good. In fact, he even popped the fortified ceramics on 48 without help, so he had rapid shot up and ready for the tough round 49. Then, as usual, we arrowstormed the first Moab on 50 and waited as long as we could before using rapid shot on the ceramics, which made it last long enough to pop the second Moab of the round. Unfortunately, I used rapid shot for the ceramics and Moabs on round 52 instead of storm of arrows, so round 53 was significantly more difficult. But after adding in a MIB, Quincy was able to pop the first Moab with an arrow storm and the final two with his main attacks. Not bad. This turned out to actually be a blessing in disguise, as rapid shot came back in time to be used on 54 and beat the round. That being said, even with leftovers, Quincy wasn't close to beating round 55. But that brings us to the final map, Workshop. I put him in the generic spot, maxed him out, and hit play. He absolutely crushed, even though the balloons moved 50% faster than normal thanks to the conveyor belts. This was made obvious by how fast the Moab zoomed on 40, forcing us to use rapid shot. Instinctively, I used rapid shot again on 43 and 46 for their ceramics, but this put us in a pickle for 47 as we lost even with a storm of arrows. So this is when we started using the map to our advantage. I used the reverse motors to slow down the balloons, and Quincy's main attack was enough to pop the ceramics even without an ability. On round 48, I used rapid shot to finish the round, and on 49, I activated reverse motors again once the ceramics started spawning. This, combined with an arrow storm, was enough to beat the round and propel us into the 50s. Here, Quincy was kind of run off the track, so I put down his village and started the round with a rapid shot to pop the first Moab. Then, once the ceramics spawned, we reversed the motors, allowing his main attack to pop them all, and used a storm of arrows for the second Moab. This left it still on cooldown for round 52, but we were able to beat the round with a rapid shot and have storm of arrows up for 53. Not ideal, but I had a plan. On this round, if we activate reverse motors and the track extensions, Quincy's main attack is almost enough to pop everything, and we only needed to take out the insides of the final Moab with a storm of arrows. Then we were able to handle round 54 with just a single rapid shot. But now we're on to round 55, the round that Quincy hasn't beaten on any expert map. We started the round with reverse motors and track extensions. This gave Quincy more time to attack the balloons, letting his main attack be strong enough to handle the first 3 waves of ceramics. I had to reactivate track extensions mid-round, but doing that and using rapid shot for the 4th rush of ceramics was enough to move on. On round 56, I used storm of arrows to pop all the rainbows when we probably could have done so with just a track extension, and round 57 we beat with just a rapid shot. But this brings us to round 58. At first, I was mortified that we got stuck due to storm of arrows being on cooldown, but we had a couple tries where we got it back with plenty of time. It seemed to just come down to RNG. Sometimes we lost to the first Moab, and others would make it to the third and even get rapid shot off cooldown right before losing. The entire time I'd be spamming reverse motors and track extensions, but this is where I got stuck. Round 58, the farthest round Quincy made it on any expert map. But this brings his average round for expert maps up to 37 when he's maxed out, and 7 in his base form. But that is how far Quincy could get on every map in BTD6. If you guys want to see me do this with other heroes, leave a like. If we hit 25,000, I'll do Gwen, but this was kind of a doozy to make, so hopefully you guys liked it.